Welcome to Windows 95 Traincast, the program designed to prepare you for the move to and implementation of Microsoft's Windows 95. Windows 95 Traincast is sponsored in part by Dell Computer Corporation. Be watching today to find out how you can win a full multimedia Dell computer system simply by viewing our program. Our host for today's show is well known in the computer training profession. Elliott Masie is president of the Masie Center. He has authored 12 books, including the popular Computer Training Handbook by Lakewood Publications. Now live from the Microsoft campus in Redmond, Washington, Elliott Masie.
Hello, I'm Elliott Masie. Welcome to Windows 95 and Systems Administration and Tools, the seventh program in the Windows 95 Traincast series focused on preparing information system and support professionals for migration to and support of Windows 95. Today's program takes an in-depth look at various features designed to make network administration easier. If you've been following this series, you know that we've already addressed such issues as cost of migration, setup and installation, networking in NetWare, and remote connectivity. The Traincast series consists of the most up-to-date information on Windows 95 available from Microsoft. Like our previous programs, we have with us today a Microsoft Worldwide Trainer and a Windows 95 Product Manager to answer your questions and demonstrate the intricacies of the Windows 95 operating system. Windows 95 is an integrated and complete operating system. Some of the features provided by Windows 95 include a more intuitive way to work and an exciting new user interface. In this session, you will see how Windows 95 has been expressly designed for manageability. Given the proliferation of PCs connected to corporate networks, Windows 95 PCs must be able to participate in any network-wide management system. Windows 95 is designed to meet various network management criteria by providing built-in support for several of the key network management standards. With this infrastructure built into Windows 95, network management applications will be able to provide tools for network managers to keep PCs and networks running more efficiently and cost-effectively. As the release of Windows 95 quickly approaches, we all need to gear up and prepare for migration. Let's quickly review the numerous educational tools provided by Microsoft and third-party vendors. Here is a list of printed and online resources to supplement what you'll learn here today. First and foremost, the Windows 95 Reviewer's Guide details information about the Windows 95 features and functionality. WinNews is an electronic newsletter that details the current status of Windows 95 and provides information about upcoming events as Windows 95 nears completion. The Gardner Group Report is a financial study on the cost of migrating to Windows 95 and the eventual savings to your organization. The Windows 95 Resource Kit is an exclusive Microsoft collection providing complete technical information and tools to help IS professionals and Windows enthusiasts become experts on Windows 95. The Microsoft Project Template gives you a head start in setting up your deployment plans for Windows 95. The template consists of a starter schedule of typical deployment tasks and specially formatted views tailored for the Windows 95 deployment effort. This Traincast series and other Microsoft TV broadcasts, as you know, offer accessible, up-to-the-minute information on many Microsoft products. In fact, we want you to utilize the information from these programs as much as possible and encourage you to record our programs and replay them. We get many questions about whether or not you can record our programs. Please feel free. You are reading the list of restrictions now. There are very few and they're easy to follow. Microsoft Authorized Technical Education Centers provide certified training courses on Windows 95. Many of these education centers are hosting today's shows. Microsoft's TechNet is a set of 2 CD-ROMs published every month containing the most up-to-date information available on all Microsoft's products and operating systems. If you order TechNet by July 17th, you will receive the August Windows 95 Special Edition. It contains over 2,600 pages of technical information for Windows 95, including the Windows 95 Resource Kit, Windows 95 support for Novell, Windows 95 training materials, Windows 95 remote administration features, and much, much more. Finally, the Masie Center offers 2 products to further your education. By subscribing to Windows 95 at Masie.com on the Internet, you will receive ongoing information resources and tips on a variety of Windows 95 training and learning strategies. The Managing Windows 95 BriefingWare is a briefing in the box to keep corporate end users and management up to date on learning events surrounding Windows 95. To find out how to get these Windows 95 resources, be watching at the end of today's show and at the mid-break about 2 hours from now. Now, today's show is scheduled to run 4 hours. We're happy to have Michael Dunn here today. Michael is a worldwide training specialist and Microsoft certified product specialist. Michael has brought along Lex Thomas, also a worldwide training specialist. Lex will be playing the role of the typical end user to help Michael better illustrate network administration using Windows 95. The first segment will cover batch setup and new administration features. The second segment will focus on remote administration tools such as System Monitor and NetWatcher. In segment 3, Michael will discuss in detail how user profiles and system policies function in Windows 95. Finally, segment 4 will cover advanced migration issues for Windows 95. We are also having Mary Haggard join us again today for another round of TechNet tips. Following each of these segments, we'll take a few minutes to answer your questions. Microsoft has a team of Windows 95 engineers standing by right now to answer your questions, so feel free to call anytime during the show. The number is 206-635-7066. Some of your questions will be selected to be answered live on the air. Today is your last chance to enter the Great Computer Giveaway Contest to win a complete multimedia computer system provided by the Dell Corporation. All you have to do is answer a simple question pertaining to the content of today's show. 100 names will be drawn from the correct answers to today's questions. All of you will be calling in with the correct answer will receive a free copy of Microsoft Encarta. Everyone that calls in will have their name entered into the grand prize drawing for a chance to win the Dell Multimedia Computer System. The winner of this system will be announced at the end of our last Windows 95 Traincast show airing on August 8th. You must be watching in order to win. So here's today's question. Name the feature of Microsoft Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. When you know the answer, call 1-800-254-4069. Please be sure and leave your name, address, and phone number when you call in. Now, let's hear about the improved batch setup in Windows 95. Michael?
Hello, my name is Michael Dunn, and welcome to Traincast. I'm a Windows 95 training specialist with Microsoft Worldwide Training and a Microsoft Certified Product Specialist. In today's show, we'll demonstrate some of the various features and improvements Windows 95 offers to make a network administrator's job easier. I've been with Microsoft since the fall of 1991, and I've seen Windows 3.0 to now Windows 95. Throughout the product changes, there has been an ongoing push to make Windows 95 easier to administer. Windows 95 includes many features that will help in setting up and remotely administering the Windows desktop. We'll talk about system administration features and functionality in 4 segments. In segment 1, batch setup admin features, we'll talk about and demonstrate the improved batch setup and various tools available to administrators. And we'll also look at an MS Batch INF, tools to create setups, custom registry entries, and setup command line switches. In segment 2, remote administration tools, we'll look at some of the various Windows 95 features using the System Monitor, and will remotely diagnose a Windows 95 system. With NetWatcher, we'll add a share and give individual users access without having to physically do so on the client's machine. We'll also be talking about Network Monitor, HP Jet Direct, and the various backup agents in Windows 95. In segment 3, user profiles and system policies, we'll discuss in greater detail the process of how user profiles function in Windows 95 and how system policies function and can be customized, building on Joe Davies' Traincast show, in which he mentioned user configuration issues and ways to secure the desktop. We'll also discuss some important issues on how user profiles and system policies interact and how network account groups function under these cases. Lastly, advanced migration issues for Windows 95. we'll talk about what you need to do to use Microsoft System Management Server 1.1 to make the migration for large Windows 95 sites easier, and server-based setup from floppy or remote program load or Ripple workstations. We will discuss some of the new SMS 1.1 features to make working with Windows 95 easier and demonstrate a system upgrade. We'll also create a Windows 95 configuration in which we boot the system from a floppy and run Windows 95 from a server on the network. The equipment we'll be using here is a Dell Pentium machine as my administrator's machine. We also have a Dell Pentium machine we'll be using as the client machine during the demos. We also have a Dell Latitude X laptop. And behind me we have a NetWare 312 server with a Dell Pentium, and also a Windows NT 351 server with a Dell Pentium with 32 megabytes of RAM. I should also mention the various chapters from the Windows 95 Resource Kit we'll be focusing on today. If you'd like to call in and ask questions or keep up with the show using the Resource Kit. Windows 3.1 offered a method for automating setup with a setup SHH file. Windows 95 offers a similar method, but allows for more customization, and the Windows 95 Resource Kit offers more tools for creating and modifying the setup script. Windows 95 setup is controlled by a default setup script, MS-INF, if no other script is specified. This script can be customized by modifying the MS-INF file. In my example here, I'll send an email message using Microsoft Mail that my users can click on to start the setup. This might work well in a small or medium-sized site in which I don't have an SMS server, or I don't want to spend the time creating a login script for a push installation, as Joe Davies showed us in the networking section. So now I'll introduce Lex Thomas. He's also a Windows 95 trainer here with Microsoft Worldwide Training. Say hi, Lex.
Hi, Lex.
Lex will be playing the role of a typical user during the demonstrations. Are you ready, Lex?
Yep, all set.
Okay, so I'll send Lex an email message here with a package for setup. Okay, it should be going your way.
Okay.
And Lex is going to open the message and then click on the setup icon to start the setup process. While Lex is running setup, let's talk about how we did that. In previous shows, Autumn, Johnny, and Joe mentioned the Windows 95 Net Setup exe tool. There's also a Batch exe tool that is now available. It doesn't really matter which tool you use. There may even be possibly third-party tools at some point. The MS-INF, or a net setup file, is simply a file with various key sections and parameters. The MS-INF is a little special in that if the file is found in the setup directory, Windows 95 will automatically use that file. Or you can create, as we've done in this case, a specific setup INF file. In this case, we've called it LexINF, for specific users and may specify custom settings on the command line. The Windows 95 Resource Kit contains some sample setup batch files. Let's take a look at some of those. So in the admin directory on the CD, we look under Resource Kit, and under Samples, and under Scripts, we have some various sample INF files that ship with the Windows 95 Resource Kit. So for instance, we can open up, this one here says MSNet. The script file here would be used to automate the setting up of the Microsoft network. So let's now look at the setup script that I created for Lex. So in the setup script file, you can notice that there's various section names, like for instance, we have setup here. We'll scroll down. There's installations, most recently used list here, and optional components. These are all defined in Appendix D of the Windows 95 Resource Kit. Some items of interest here, you can notice that I've got express equals 1. That's going to bypass some of the screens that Lex would have normally had to have pressed enter to continue on. Also, I've specified the installation directory here, C:\Windows. I've got some other things here too. For instance, VRC equals 1. What that does is, for instance, if Lex had some files in his machine that happened to be marked newer, we would go ahead and overwrite those files with the Windows 95 files. That might be if you had different versions of beta software, things like that, and this will basically give you all the newest files off the CD. You notice here we've got a line that says reboot equals 1. What's going to happen there? You remember Johnny mentioned that during setup at some point during the second phase, we have to reboot the computer to enter the third phase. So this switch will automatically, during the batch setup, reboot the machine so the user doesn't have to be there to press enter. The EBD0 section, what that does, that says to the system, when you do setup, don't create an emergency boot disk. That might be kind of nice to do so if you don't want to have everybody have to have a floppy there to create the startup disk during setup. We also have some other lines here for setting the time zone. At the end of setup, it'll ask you what time zone that you're currently in. And for instance here, I've just hard-coded it to say, okay, I'm in the Pacific time zone, so the user doesn't have to put that in. As we scroll down, we've got optional components. And as we'll see later on, we can fill this in either with the batch exe tool or through the setup log.txt file. Scroll down a little further. I automatically put in the name and organization name, just in case Lex couldn't spell his name. I've got Lex in there and the organization Microsoft. Then under networks, I've got automatically putting in there the file and print sharing services and also remote registry services, which we'll talk more about in section 2. I also have it automatically setting up user level security here by specifying a pass-through agent and setting security to domain. I've specified that Lex's machine, when he comes up in Windows 95, will automatically be using user level security with our NT domain as the account database. Scroll down a little further, we've got vReader being logging into the Midway domain and being validated automatically. The printer section here is empty. The reason I left that empty for this demo is I don't want to install any printers automatically. If you wanted to specify certain printer types during the installation, you could just add them here in the script, and that way users wouldn't have to actually know what kind of printer they're printing to. I just leave it blank, that way it just skips that part of setup. And this section here is probably the most interesting section for the Windows 95 setup. It's a pretty powerful section. In this install section, I can pretty much do anything I would normally do with an INF file that you might have had to have done in the setup INF in Windows 3.1. For instance, in this scenario here, I'm adding some registry keys during setup. It says add reg and then apps, and there's a section down here then that in this registry key location adds an apps install path that points to my NT machine back here that gets an apps.ini file, which we'll talk about later. And I did that through the batch file. That way it'll automatically be put in Lex's machine when he runs setup. Also, the registration wizard is on the welcome menu when you first start up setup. With this registry key here I added in, it'll actually disable the button on the welcome menu, so the online registration wizard won't be available for Lex when he is finished installing, which you may want to do at your site. Scroll down a little further, I've got some other registry keys here that are added in for group policies and such things, and these are documented in the research kit again in Appendix D. And then the final section here is just some other settings for defining his settings for NW Reader and NW Link settings for his Novell network setup. Okay, so let's create a new script. There are some basic steps for creating successful automated setups. Again, in past Traincast shows, we have mentioned a process to the deployment of Windows 95 in a company. It's very important to follow that plan as a user's first impression of the product can be molded by setup. The steps for a successful setup are again, number 1, review the product. The first step towards successful migration of Windows 95 is to learn the technical side of Windows 95. There are a number of resources available, such as the Windows 95 Reviewer's Guide, the Windows 95 Resource Kit, and the Microsoft TechNet CD. Second step is assemble the planning team and tools. And tools needed for this phase include Windows 95, the proper staff, test computers, and an inventory of your hardware and software. The next step towards migrating your Windows 95 in your organization would be to determine the primary client configuration or configurations that will be used under Windows 95. With automated setup scripts, this is important as certain configuration options can assume specific client needs. This also means installing on a single system first. Make sure you test the install on the best configuration your company has and the oldest configuration your company has. Conduct the lab test. Now that you have evaluated your hardware and software and determined the client installations, you'll now want to begin the evaluation and testing process. This is key to a successful and easy migration to Windows 95. It is this testing that will show you problems both you and your users may encounter. Now that you have tested your existing hardware and software with Windows 95, The next step will involve preparation for and planning of the actual rollout of Windows 95 to your organization. This involves setting up Windows 95 in the server-based setup, creating setup batch scripts to customize the setup process to your specifications, and modifying your servers to do an automated or push installation. Step 6, conduct the pilot rollout. The pilot rollout is where you test the rollout of Windows 95 to a small group to help you identify problems or issues that you may have when rolling out to your entire organization. And that section is primarily what we're talking about today, is the batch install testing and going about fine-tuning these different INF files. Step 7, the final rollout. Based on the results of your pilot rollout, you're going to modify the rollout plan based on the feedback from your users in the pilot rollout and to solve problems you encountered. And step 8, roll out Windows 95. Well, that seems like a lot of work. I thought Windows 95 was supposed to be easier to set up. Well, keep in mind, you probably want to base the prep time for the migration on how many actual machines you're doing. Spending 2 weeks to prepare to migrate 10 machines is not something, of course, I'd recommend. But getting the script properly set up and testing the effects on users, applications, and work is still vital. So again, there's 4 basic methods to creating a script. You could use net setup exe, or batch exe, or you could use information from the setup log txt file from a current Windows 95 installation, or manually create the file from scratch. It doesn't really matter which method you use. In fact, you might be best mixing all these methods together, and here's why. You can use your setup system to get the right mix of optional components installed for your users. Once you have the standalone setup functioning, you can use parts of the setup log txt to automate the rest of the installations. Johnny touched on that in his show, so let's look at a setup log file that was used to create Lex setup script. Okay, I'll go ahead and open it here. And you'll notice right away it says optional components in the setup log. What I can actually do here is I can cut and paste this section and stick it directly into a setup INF file. So it makes it a lot easier. I don't have to go in and set 1s, 0s, things like that for the different components. I can set up a standalone configuration the way I want it and then just cut and paste this section. You'll notice too there's other information in here also, such as system information you could also add in to the setup INF file. One thing to note is that the network settings aren't stored in the setup txt file, so to automate the network settings themselves, you'll still need to have those manually added in or use the batch exe tool to put those in the file. Now, we'll run batch exe to create a script. So I'll go ahead, go to the admin directory on the CD, enter net tools, go to net setup, and there's batch exe. And batch exe is just a VB application that we can use to modify the MS batch INF files. I'll go ahead and open the one that we did for Lex first. Let's take a look at that one. Okay. And as you can see, it automatically filled in the information. It says Lex Thomas, Microsoft, Windows 95 typical user. I'll go into installation options, and for instance, prompt for startup disk is turned off because I told it to do that in the script. There's the installation directory. It's got typical, set for Pacific time, all those type things. And what I can actually do is I can just change the name here. And I could change, for instance, one of the installation options, maybe prompt for the startup disk. I could change it to a portable installation. Then I can save that out. And we'll call it okay. And now let's go take a look at that INF file. And you notice now the EBD equals 1 instead of 0. Lex's was 0. And we'll scroll through. And the installation directory is still Windows. And let's see. The organization name, let's just scroll by it. Oh, there it is, Michael Dunn, Microsoft. And we'll scroll up a little bit higher there, and it should say on the setup type, install type equals 2, whereas Lex's equals 1. And now what I can also do is we'll take that setup log.txt file I had earlier, and I could just highlight this information here. We'll just highlight a little bit of it and copy it, and I could paste it right into this section here. So that way I don't have to manually figure out what I want to add or remove. We'll show net setup exe when doing the SBS, or server-based setup, later in segment 4. In Windows 3.1 custom setups, there were many requests for settings or functions that the setup engine didn't provide. Either at the end of setup, the site ran another tool to customize the system, or some other creative INI or editing tool was used. In Windows 95, having the central registry solves much of that. You can add sections to the script that can modify anything in the registry or copy any file during setup to the client's configuration. Let's look at some of the samples again that ship in the Windows 95 Resource Kit. So again, I'll go to the admin directory on the CD, and under Resource Kit, Samples, Scripts. Again, we've got those sample setup scripts. Let's, for instance, look at user profiles, as we'll be doing this later also. I open it up, and you scroll through here, and for instance, it has the registry section, and it also has a copy section. So during setup, with this INF file added to my MS Batch INF, it would add these registry keys, and then down here it would copy this file called grouppol.dll to the user's machine. So what have we done so far? We've looked at the contents of a setup script file and done a setup demo. We've also talked about the different methods you can use to create the files, and we've looked at the methods to further customize setup. Let's check on Lex now. So hey Lex, how's this going? How's it going with setup?
Well, it's going pretty well, Mike. Smooth as cream pie.
Well, thanks, Lex. Why don't you give me a holler when setup is finished, okay?
All right.
During Lex's setup, I created a batch file that automatically selected Lex's workgroup that he'd be part of. I want to mention something now, though, that was also available for Windows for Workgroups 3.11. I created a workgroup ini file that on the installation point limits what groups he could join even at a later date. Chapter 5 of the Resource Kit discusses this file in more detail, but let's look at it right now on the server. Okay, I stored it in the Windows 95 directory on the server. What it's going to do here is I've got an options section, and it says required equals true, so that means Lex has to pick from the list I give him. And I have a workgroup section with the name of the workgroup, and then this equal sign is a little bit different than Workgroups 3.11. I put on there the domain, and I also put on there the preferred server for the network server that he is automatically going to get chosen or automatically selected for him when he installs the network components. So it makes it in the future, if he ever has to add or remove things, it'll automatically put him in the correct workgroup. Basically, it allows an admin to limit the workgroups users can choose from during setup. It also allows for settings for domain and preferred server to be based off the workgroup the user selects. I just placed Lex in a workgroup during setup, but the real advantage of this file is that after setup is completed, if Lex tries to change the workgroups, the UI will not let him create a workgroup I have not identified on my LAN. People using workgroups can sometimes see the proliferation of workgroups as people randomly add them if the admin does not control this. The workgroup ini file needs to be created, though, before a user runs setup, so it will get copied to the local installation of Windows. Let's take a look now at the actual email message I sent Lex. I actually sent it using the Microsoft Exchange client in Windows 95 to his Microsoft Mail 3X post office. I'll go ahead and open up Exchange, go back a folder to my sent items. There's my email message I sent Lex. Open it up. And you can see it's a pretty basic email message. I put some fancy text in it, but it has an OLE package in here. Let's go ahead and look at the OLE package. And as you can see, it points to the setup server. It has some command line switches and the setup script I wanted him to use. I didn't use the default MS Batch INF, but instead explicitly told the setup script what to use. I could have sent the mail message to a group of users, and they all would have used the same script, or I could have sent a modified message to other users to specify specific user settings. What about these command line switches, though? Chapter 3 of the Windows 95 Resource Kit lists the command line switches for setup. For instance, you may want to disable the scan disk check if you are using Windows 95 on machines with third-party disk compression. There's a switch, for example, also to copy the temporary setup files to a specific location during setup in the first phase. Well, let's see if Lex is finished with setup now. How's it going, Lex?
It went real well, Mike.
Did the welcome screen give you a choice for online registration?
No, it did not.
Well, that's good. So the batch file did its job.
Yeah.
Let's just show that. On my screen, when I bring up the welcome menu, I have a button for online registration. And on Lex's screen, this is going to be on. You can go ahead and continue, Lex. In the setup script I used for Lex's machine, I also included something that's really nice that's mentioned in Chapter 22 of the Resource Kit. It's called the apps.ini file. What I did was add to Lex's registry a pointer to an apps.ini file. In the apps.ini file is a listing of applications that an admin might want users to be able to set up at a later date. Since that file is centrally located, it can be edited by the admin to add new setup choices to a user's desktop. So let's go ahead and look at Lex's. Lex, would you go ahead and go into Add and Remove Programs?
Sure.
And you'll notice there, Lex has Plus for Windows 95. Go ahead and start the install, Lex.
Okay.
And as you notice, it automatically starts the Plus for Windows 95 setup. So let's go ahead and take a look at the apps.ini file. And inside that file, this was what Lex's machine was pointing to. And you might want to write this down. It's a pretty useful little file to know about. I've got a section here called App Install List. And then underneath it, I have the name of the program, equals, and then the UNC, or Universal Naming Convention, that points to the actual setup program. Now, if this setup program required a drive letter to run setup, I'd have to go ahead and put an asterisk in there. Now, the Plus for Windows 95 doesn't, so I don't need that. In this segment, we have looked at the details of the Windows 95 batch install methods. Later, we'll talk more about how to add services from the Resource Kit and how to show how to get the server set up properly. We looked at the custom setup scripts with registries, Workgroup issues, and also the apps.ini file. In the next segment, Remote Administration Tools, we'll discuss some of the new admin tools in Windows 95 and how to remotely monitor and control the Windows 95 desktops.
Thanks, Mike and Lex. Michael is on his way over here to help me field your questions. But first, let's welcome back Mary Haggard with another TechNet tip. TechNet is a convenient and easy way to get technical information you need about Windows 95 and other Microsoft products. Mary?
Hi, thanks for tuning in. I'm here to tell you about supporting Windows 95 in your organization by using Microsoft TechNet. As a TechNet subscriber, 2 CDs are delivered to your desk every month, containing the most up-to-date support, strategy, training materials, and utilities available from Microsoft. This information comes straight from the Microsoft Product Groups and Microsoft Product Support Services Division. Today, I will be using TechNet to show you how to implement what you see in this Traincast. We've worked hard to get very useful information on Windows 95 to our customers before the release of the product. In fact, our August issue of TechNet is dedicated to Windows 95 and will include over 2,600 pages of information on the operating system. Michael is discussing features in Windows 95 that are specifically designed to make a network administrator's job easier. Let me show you here how using the TechNet CD can simplify your job even more. We've been discussing usage and configuration of batch setup scripts. Let me use the query engine in TechNet to find what information the CD contains on this important topic. I'll type Windows 95 and setup scripts. Here I see a number of articles pertaining to batch setup scripts from many different areas of the CD. Let's look at a few of the topics my search found. Chapter 4 in the Windows 95 Resource Kit contains information on server-based setup for Windows 95. In this chapter, I can learn how to install and configure batch script for shared and complete network installations. There also is information on setting up Windows 95 from Novell servers and on how to plan batch scripts as part of the Windows 95 deployment strategy. In fact, if you specifically want to know what parameters and options are available for installing networking components, you can refine this search to see what network batch script parameters are available. I'll type network batch script parameters. And choose Last Topics Found. Here, I can find the categories for these options and their specific settings. Later in this broadcast, Michael will be discussing user profiles and system policies. I'll continue by showing you some great information on TechNet to help you define and build these features into your network.
Thanks, Mary. Michael is here along with Frank Ramirez to answer your questions. Frank is a Windows 95 product manager. You may remember him from the Q&A session in the Windows 95 Traincast series number 4 called Networking with Windows 95, including printing. You know, Frank, I have something to ask you right off the bat regarding today's contest question. About this setting access parameters, wasn't that a security issue that Autumn covered back in show number 4?
Yeah, actually, we did cover that in show number 4, and Autumn was speaking, that was the networking show. Autumn was speaking about really 2 different things. She was talking about the share level security and then the user level or pass-through security. The share level security was where essentially you need to provide a password, if you will, and what happens then, you're able to access the directory immediately. But in the user level or pass-through security, what happens is you actually have to go to the server, and the server will authenticate on its account list the username and password, and that way we have 2 different levels of security. But for this, the purposes of this show and that question, what we're looking for is actually going to be found in this 3rd segment, and that's where people should be focusing their attention today.
So they should stay tuned to that.
Yeah, that 3rd segment is pretty important.
Good. Since we've been addressing the contest question, I think it's time for me to ask it again. Don't miss your chance to win a Dell multimedia computer system. I want everyone who's eligible to enter. Believe me, it's an easy way to win a copy of Microsoft Encarta, and who knows, you might be the grand prize winner. Today's question is, name the feature of Microsoft Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. Once again, name the feature of Microsoft Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. Call 1-800-254-4069 and answer the question. As Frank said, look for one of our later segments. I'll have some meaty information for that. Well, Mike, we're going to put you right back on the spot here. Okay. One of the questions that we had was from Joan from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Joan wanted to know, are there any special names to the batch setup files? You mentioned netsetup.inf.
Right. Yeah, there's no actual special name there. You can name it anything you want. There is one special name that we will look for automatically, and that's that MS batch INF file. But other than that, you on the command line, you can specify anything you want.
So it's at your discretion,
right,
in a sense. Frank, we had a call from Bill Seward from New York City, and okay, Bill wanted to know, is there a comprehensive reference source for creating and using batch setup scripts?
Yeah, I think everybody should get the resource kit, essentially. I mean, the resource kit is the Bible. It's about 1,500 pages long, and we just finished the final version, so no longer are we in the beta resource kit. We actually have the final one available. But in Chapter 5, it goes through automated and push installations, and then I think in Appendix D in the back, they have the MS Batch INF information where they actually go through and explain all the different parameters, so especially those for automating setup. So that's a really great resource for everyone out there.
And they'll find the kinds of information they need there for that question.
Completely comprehensive, yes.
Super. Mike, we had another question from you. This comes from Miami, Florida, and from Carla. Carla wanted to know, now that Windows 95 does setup inside of Windows 3.1, how do we do clean install setups?
Right. That falls under the planning stage a little bit to make sure that you try the best machines at your site and the worst machines. That'll kind of alleviate some of those problems. But also Windows 95, on the command line, you can specify the /D switch and essentially skip your present version of Windows and we'll install a clean version of Win 3.1 just for the setup process. So that's a way to do it also. Okay.
Good. Back to you. Sheila from Philadelphia wanted to know, Frank, can Windows 95 install on a computer with a NTFS partition? And I have to say, I'm not sure what an NTFS partition is, so maybe you could explain.
The acronym, I think, is a Netware File System, so that'll explain the acronym to everyone out there. But no, actually, we cannot install on that locally. Locally, you have to have a FAT partition. We can if it's a remote situation. But we always need to have a FAT partition if you want to install Windows 95. And if you have, let's say, a multiple boot configuration associated with an NTFS system, then if it has a FAT partition associated with it, you can install on that, but only in a local situation.
I see. Okay. And I have a question here, and this is coming from Frank, another Frank, down once again, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, wanted to know, I don't see an option to install all the optional components shipped with Windows 95 at once. Could you take Frank through that?
Right. Yeah, there's not a selection during setup to install everything at once. So basically what you should do is, like I showed, you create the setup log txt file from a system, and you can just take all the options from the setup log txt and put them in your batch INF file. There's no option just click on and say install everything. But the typical option works fine too. That's a pretty good one on the compact. You don't really necessarily have to install everything all the time.
Right, and I would assume that testing will help you kind of ensure that.
That's going to be the best way, yep.
Along the way. Either one of you wanted to handle this one. When using the copy files equal in the install section of the msbatch.inf, can you specify a source location, or are the files required to be the same directory as the CAP files? You see, we know you're technical out there.
Well, I'm going to punt to Mike.
I'll put that up there if you can.
Yeah, that one there, it's kind of a long question, but bottom line, yes, you can specify in the layout INF file different locations for files. Actually, the INF installer utility that's in the resource kit does that automatically. When you install other options, it'll modify the layout INF to point to other places for these files. So you can do that.
See, we just have a couple of minutes, and we'll be getting some more user questions in the next segment. Just generally, I mean, what do you see, if we can just sort of summarize, what have been the benefits of the overall new administration features in that?
Well, there's much more customization possible now. With Win3.1, the setup SHH file, that was fairly limited, but in Windows 95, you can pretty much do anything you want with that batch INF file. Like we saw registry keys, copying files, many more choices for administrators.
And I would assume that these, from a product manager point of view, part of the plus from a group adapting Windows 95 is this ability to kind of manage and control.
Yeah, the ability to remotely control the situation and install is something that's a great benefit, and it's something that, I think, like Mike said, is a great improvement over the earlier system. So there's a lot of new information. Go to the resource kit. It is available on the CD SKU right there, so you don't really have to go out and get it. But I think that's where you really want to look to get the information you need.
I know we're what are we now? Just a couple weeks away from ship here.
I think we're down to days now. I think that's what we're down to.
We're down to days, and I would imagine that as we get closer, energy here at Microsoft is anybody sleeping these days and what?
I think we're all pretty excited. Yeah, it's getting pretty exciting around here.
Just one more question to you, Mike. As a trainer, and I know you've been doing training. What kinds of questions are you getting during the batch setup when you teach that? What have been people's questions? Can you think back to some of the classes you've been doing?
Well, primarily the differences are it's been very important for students to understand how the regular local install works first. Because if they kind of just skip through that and they try to just jump to the batch setup, it doesn't always make as much sense to them. So it's been very important they understand how local install works, what are the phases of setup, and then take that information and go to batch setup now.
And do you think that folks will get that fairly easily? Do you think it's when you're in class, do they grasp that pretty quickly?
Yeah, I think so. And plus, when they've had a chance to do it a few times, just walk through it themselves and actually do a batch setup a couple times, then it gets pretty clear after that.
I'd like to reiterate that. I think it's so important, really, for the end user, actually for the system administrator, to sort of mimic the end user experience and actually to go ahead and do an install himself, as opposed to just thinking about remote installs, to go through the process several times so he understands the end user experience before he goes ahead and starts to customize the script.
I know I've been part of the 30,000 beta troops that have been out there testing the product externally, and I know that's always been helpful for all of us to kind of even though we know the product real well, put ourselves in the shoes of the new end user, and that way you can kind of see it from that perspective, and it's been really helpful. Well, that's all the time that we have for questions right now, and I want to thank you for calling in with your questions. Michael, why don't you head back to your Traincast workstation? Okay. Thank you, Frank. We'll see you on the next segment. Please feel free to call with your questions anytime during the broadcast. As you can tell, we're getting very specific questions from our end users, and don't be shy if they're very technical. Our Microsoft engineers are standing by to take your call, and the number is 206-635-7066. In this next segment, Michael will look at Windows 95 remote administration tools. Using NetWatcher, Michael will show us how to add a share and give individual network users access without having to physically use the client's machine. Michael?
In the previous segment, we talked about Windows 95 batch setups, the tools available to create them, and we also saw Lex Thomas upgrade his system using a batch setup I sent him in mail. In this next segment, we're going to talk much more about the tools admins can use once Windows 95 is set up. Windows 3.1 offered little out of the box for remote administration tools. Many tools were created by third-party vendors to solve admin issues. Windows for Workgroups offered some enhanced tools for remotely controlling Windows desktops. All these methods, though, were not under one umbrella. Some schemes worked with others, and also some admins weren't aware of the tools. Windows 95 provides some very useful tools for helping admins remotely monitor and control Windows 95 desktops. Third-party tools will still be around since we have not made them obsolete, as much as we've created a standard method to administer Windows 95 clients. How do we do that? On every system, there are three types of resources to be managed. Hardware, which deals with the motherboard, add-in cards, hard drive, monitors, mice, keyboard, including installation, configuration, and asset management. The operating system, which includes drivers, system services, user interface components, including system software distribution, and system user configuration management, security and data backup. Application software, the installation and monitoring of usage to maintain compliance with licensing. Finally, systems must be maintained over time. This includes troubleshooting and supporting end-user and network problems, as well as monitoring desktop performance. A solution to managing all the systems in an enterprise requires a combination of operating systems with the right infrastructure and management applications. Windows 95 provides a comprehensive infrastructure for system management. This infrastructure collects information about the hardware, operating system, and applications and makes that information available to system management applications. Access to management information is provided through standard documented APIs, Microsoft Win32 Application Programming Interface, and support for transmitting that information over the network is provided through industry standards such as Remote Procedure Calls, RPC, and Simple Management Network Protocol, SNMP. Microsoft currently sells a management system application called Microsoft System Management Server. System Management Server provides features to ease the management of multiple types of systems across the enterprise, including MS-DOS, Microsoft Windows version 3.1, Microsoft Windows NT, and with SMS 1.1, we can now inventory and administer Windows 95 systems. Some of the features of SMS include software distribution and installation, network application management, inventory management, remote troubleshooting and performance tuning. System Management Server is an application that runs on Windows NT Server and records data about the systems it manages in an SQL database. It provides required management agents for the system and uses the infrastructure built into Windows 95 to deliver a complete cross-platform solution. We'll talk more about SMS in our final segment. The fundamental components of any system management architecture include a store of data about the resources to be managed, open interfaces for retrieving data from that store, a protocol for communicating that data over the network to a system management application, and security to provide protection from unauthorized access. In Windows 95, these components are the data store, or the registry interface for retrieving the data, the registry APIs, the SNMP agent protocol for communicating the data, which is RPC and SNMP protocol, and security is provided by the Windows 95 user-level security. In this diagram, we can see that in Windows 95, with the different layers, the registry acts as the middle portion where all data flows from the system hardware through the different agents out to the network. Windows 95 consolidates configuration and status information for all hardware and software components into a single structured database called a registry, very much similar to Windows NT. To enable local editing of the registry, applications such as regedit make Win32 registry API calls. To enable administrators to access registry information on remote computers, the registry API calls from regedit or other applications are sent across the network to the remote computers using Remote Procedure Calls, or RPC. This permits administrators to view and modify the configuration of all hardware and software components that store their information in the registry. When a user logs on to a Windows 95 computer, there are two sources of registry information: user-specific information contained in the file user.dat, and hardware or computer-specific settings contained in the file system.dat. Together, these components make up the registry for a given user and session of Windows 95. By breaking the registry into these logical components, Windows 95 gains a number of advantages. The registry components can be located in physically different locations. For example, the system.dat component and the other Windows 95 system files may be located on the PC's hard disk. The user.dat portion of the registry may be located on a network server and be copied to the Windows 95 computer during login. In this configuration, users are able to log on to various PCs on the network and still have their unique network privileges and desktop configuration, thus allowing the roving user the same configuration regardless of what computer they might be using. Multiple users can share the system. Each could have a separate user logon name and copies of the user.dat called user profiles, and their own set of desktop configurations. We need some protocols to move the data around the network. An RPC connection can be made using name pipes with Microsoft's vReader, or NetBIOS using NetBEUI, TCP/IP, or IPX, or just with IPS/XPX. The SNMP agent can send data over IPX/SPX or TCP/IP. The Simple Network Management Protocol, SNMP, is a family of specifications that provides a means for collecting network management information from devices on a network. It was originally developed as part of the TCP/IP protocol suite in the Internet community to monitor and troubleshoot Internet routers. It has since been extended to be used as a standard protocol for the monitoring of servers, routers, bridges, and intelligent hubs. SNMP is an open, standard protocol used to transport management information and commands between a management console and a managed entity. SNMP information can be sent, as we said earlier, using TCP/IP or IPX. Several network management products use SNMP as a remote protocol, including HP OpenView, Novell NMS, IBM NetView, and Sun SunNet Manager. An SNMP agent is any device running SNMP agent software, which is typically a server or router. An SNMP console is a computer running SNMP management software, which can query the various SNMP agents on the network for network or server information. An SNMP agent collects a database of information about a device and/or its environment. The collection of data maintained by the managed device is called the Management Information Base, or MIB. The MIB is a list of data items which are available when an SNMP console queries a device. A MIB for a router might include items like drop packets, hops to specific network numbers, and network congestion information. A MIB for a server might include items like available disk space, average utilization, and number of active connections. MIBs can be any of the following. Standard MIBs are defined by the Internet Standard Groups. The first standard MIB was MIB1, which defined 114 data items. MIB2 defines 172 objects. MIB1 and 2 were designed for managing IP routers. Experimental MIBs have specific information about other aspects of network management, but are not part of the standard MIBs. Private MIBs are designed by individual companies or vendors that need to collect particular data about their own network devices. Private MIBs define their own items and tend to be very product-specific. Windows 95 provides SNMP agent software to run on a Windows 95 workstation. Windows 95 does not, though, provide SNMP console management software. The Windows 95 SNMP agent software is implemented as a Win32 service, which is a hidden 32-bit console application using 32-bit Windows sockets over both TCP/IP or IPX. The information that a management system can request from an agent is contained in a MIB, as we mentioned earlier. A MIB is a set of manageable objects representing various types of information about a network device, such as the number of active sessions or the version of the network operating system software running on the host. SNMP management systems and agents share a common understanding of MIB objects. The Windows 95 SNMP agent supports Internet MIB 1 and 2. You should note Windows 95 only ships support for MIB 1 and MIB 2. Experimental or private MIBs are supported only when a MIB handler is written by a third-party vendor that provides data specific to their MIB. Custom MIB handlers can be written using the Windows NT SDK or Windows 95 SDK. So let's enable an SNMP agent on my machine right now. So again, I'm going to go to the admin directory, and under Net Tools, the you'll see there's an SMP agent. Okay, and I click on that, and the agent's in there in an INF file. Now to add that in, I have to go to the network setup and add the SMP agent as a service. So I'm going to add the service. It's not listed in the default set, so I go ahead and say have disk. I need to point to the correct directory with the SMP agent software. There it is, and I'll click OK, and it adds it in. Now you notice when I highlight the SMP agent, there's no properties for it. We'll talk about that in a moment, how to actually change the properties for the SMP agent. Also note, I could have added this agent also through a batch setup using the services line in the batch INF file. So the UI for the system agent, if I want to change the settings, is actually something we'll talk about a little bit more later as POL-edit, or policy editor. I'll go ahead and open the registry, and at the bottom here it's got SMP agent, and I can change things like the various communities and permitted managers for the agent, and what this really does is just add different registry keys to my system. Windows 95 does not ship with support for Intel's DMI or desktop management interface, but support will be available by CompuServe or other electronic services after release and is included in SMS 1.1. The primary function of an agent is to perform the get next, and set operations requested by a management system. An agent is any computer running an SMP agent software, typically a server or router. The only operation initiated by an agent is a trap. The trap operation alerts management systems to an extraordinary event, such as a password violation. In Windows 95, you can set the parameters for these events in the policy editor, as we saw earlier. For instance, you can set the community name. A community name is a group that hosts running in the same SMP service belong to. Communities are identified by a community name, and the use of that community name provides primitive security and context checking for agents that receive requests and initiate traps, as well as for management systems that initiate requests and receive traps. An agent would not accept a request from a management system outside the community. Also, you can set permitted managers. Permitted managers can be specified for manager consoles that can request traps from the client SMP agent. To prevent unauthorized access to the systems that are being managed, a system management architecture must implement an effective security model. Beginning with Windows 95, Microsoft provides security by using Windows 95 user-level security and a security provider. A user must be configured for user-level security to be configured for remote registry administration. Windows 95 features a variety of tools that allow users or network administrators to configure the hardware and software on a Windows 95 PC. These tools include registry tools, performance monitoring, and remote administration of file systems and shares. Windows 95 does not ship with any utilities to administer non-Windows 95 security systems, such as Windows NT domains or NetWare binaries, or other file systems. Windows 95 does not have remote system debugging capabilities like Windows NT. You should also note Windows 95 system management tools are intended for network administrators only. Some of the tools, NetWatcher and System Monitor, for example, do not get automatically installed during setup and must be specified as an accessory during a custom setup or through Add Remove Programs icons of Control Panel. Other tools, such as the SMP agent, Remote Registry Service, and Network Monitor agent, do not appear as a service in Control Panel at all, and you must point to a directory on the Windows 95 CD where the INF and service components are located, or set them up in a batch INF file as we've done here. The Windows 95 primary user management tools are the Registry Editor and System Policy editing tools. The Registry Editor, or regedit, allows the network administrator to directly read and write values that are contained in the user and system setting portions of the registry. Using this tool, it is possible to read current settings and modify them, create new keys and values, or delete current keys and values in the registry. The remote registry agent on the client machine is a hidden 32-bit console application. The registry editing tool can edit remote registries using the RPC-enabled Win32 registry APIs built into Windows 95. In the first diagram, a system administrator runs regexe to their machine to remotely edit a user's registry. Regedit makes a call to the advanced APIs to WinReg DLL, the RPC client for registry services. The RPC mechanism then goes through Secure 32 DLL to get the security credentials of the administrator to send to the client. If the security provider is a Windows NT machine, this call goes directly through vReader. If it's a Novell network server, the calls are passed through WinNet32 DLL before being passed to NW Reader. Once those credentials are received from the security provider, RPC sends the information through WinSock in the case of IPX or TCP/IP, and NetBIOS in the case of NetBEUI. This data then goes through the NDIS stack and out to the wire to the client machine to be edited. The administrator's credentials come over the network to the client machine through WinSock or the NetBIOS interface, depending upon the protocol being used, and go through the RPC layer on the client machine. Then the RPC layers request verification of the credentials through, again, Secure 32 DLL. Secure 32 uses the MSSP VXD if the security provider is a Windows NT machine, or NWSP DLL if it is in a network server. This request then passes through vReader or NW Reader respectively and goes to the security provider. If the administrator's name is not on the ACL on the client machine, then FileSec is used to check for group membership to validate the access. Once the access has been approved, the actual editing of the registry passes through RPC to the regserve and the RPC application running on the client machine. All edits are then sent to the Advanced API 32, which writes those changes to the registry on the client machine. This process is just for securing the initial RPC connection. After the credentials are verified, the administrators would send RPC traffic to the remote machine to its regserve service for access to the registry. Let's, for example, make sure that Lex's machine is set up for this process. So Lex is going to help me make sure this machine is set up for remote registry. So the first thing we need for the remote registry is to make sure that we've got user-level security. So Lex, why don't we make sure that your machine is set up properly for remote registry?
Okay, great. Mike, the first thing we need to do is go to Network Neighborhood and select the properties. Once we're in Network Properties, I can go to Access Control and verify that I have user-level access control enabled, which I do. And then I need to go to the Configuration tab and verify that I have Microsoft Remote Registry Service installed.
Okay. We also need to make sure that remote administration is enabled in the Remote Administration tab. So why don't you check that too, Lex?
Okay. Well, I can go Start, Settings, and Control Panel. And in Control Panel, we have a passwords icon that I can click on. And if I just select Remote Administration, we see that we do have domain admins added to the list of administrators for my registry.
Thanks, Lex. If needed, you can add the network administrator's name to the list of administrators under the Remote Administration tab, as Lex showed us, in Control Panel Passwords, and then restart Windows 95. If the security provider is a Windows NT domain, the domain group domain admins, as we saw here, is the default remote administrator. We can also add the network administrator's name in the dialog box, but you only want to do that if they're not a member of the domain admin group for some reason. If the security provider is a Novell NetWare server, the supervisor account is the default administrator account. In this case, the network administrator's name may need to be added manually, since most network administrators log on to the network server with supervisor equivalent account name assigned to them and not the supervisor account name. The network administrator's account name must be specified explicitly or through a group membership. Supervisor equivalence is not sufficient. To access a remote computer's registry, a network administrator must follow these steps. They need to verify the network administrator's computer is using user-level security and using the same security provider as the client, as we've seen here. They also need to make sure that they add the Microsoft Remote Registry Service through the Control Panel network, or have it added into the system during the batch setup. Again, the Remote Registry Service is under the Admin NetTools Remote Registry directory on the Windows 95 CD. They would then restart and run regedit, and from the Registry Editor menu, they would select Registry Connect Network Registry and enter the computer name of the remote computer. So let's look at Lex Registry remotely. So I go to Registry, Connect Network Registry, type in the name of Lex's machine, and we have to verify that I have access to Lex's registry, and there we go. So let's go over some of the basic registry sections. Also be aware, editing the registry directly can be hazardous to your health. If you mess up a client's registry, they may show up at your office with a knuckle sandwich for you. Always be careful when editing someone's registry and only change things that you know what they do or if asked by a Windows 95 support person. The registry itself is discussed in Chapter 33 of the Windows 95 Resource Kit. Okay, so let's look at Lex's registry remotely. So right now, if we click here, I can look at HKey class's root, and that contains the OLE information just like it would have with Windows 3.1. And of course, we're doing it remotely, so it takes a little bit of time to have it connect over the network. Okay. We also have HKey current user. Let's double click on that. Now, since Lex is logged into that machine, these are the current settings for Lex's various desktop configurations, control panel, things like that. Also, let's look at HKey local machine. In HKey local machine, we have various things that deal with the hardware settings for Lex's machine, such as BIOS settings, monitor, the ISA slots, floppy controllers, things like that. Various network settings for different security network providers and security settings. And then under HKey users, that would list the default information. So if Lex didn't log in as Lex on his machine, these are the settings that he would get. Or if anybody new came to Lex's machine, these are the settings they would inherit. And then Lex's information here. And this actual key here is referenced back to HKey current user. And we also have HKey current config. This key here deals in the registry with things such as the current configuration when we're using hardware profiles, and it has such things as the current display type and other system information such as the printers. And then lastly, we have a key here that's not actually in the registry, but it's used for performance. It's HKey Dynadata. And it's used, as we'll talk about next, by System Monitor and other components in Windows 95 to gather information dynamically in the system. This key is not physically in the system.dat, it's generated in memory as we use the system, but yet you can see through this interface, I can use standard registry APIs to get to that data. The System Policy Editor allows a network administrator to create a series of policies, registry settings saved in a policy file, and place them on a network server. Every time a Windows 95 user logs onto the network, the policy file is automatically read, and the appropriate registry settings in the policy file are copied to the user's registry. We'll talk about that in much more detail in the next segment. Windows 95 includes System Monitor, or sysmon.exe, as an enhanced performance monitoring utility. This gives network administrators and help desk personnel the ability to quickly troubleshoot performance problems caused by an invalid configuration or conflict. The System Monitor is a replacement for the Windows for Workgroup's WinMeter. System Monitor provides more detailed information about the system's file and network I/O performance. The interfaces to the System Monitor are open and extensible by third parties. The variety of categories in System Monitor depends on what VXDs are currently loaded in the system. A good example of this behavior is the Modem Throughput Monitor. You do not see an option for modems in the System Monitor unless an application is using Unimodem for a call session. A Win16 communications application cannot be monitored since it doesn't use Unimodem. Unlike Windows NT's Performance Monitor utility, Windows 95's System Monitor does not have the capability to store performance data in log files. The performance data in Windows 95 is exposed at the registry location we mentioned earlier, HKey Dynadata perfstats. This key is stored in RAM and is not stored in the actual registry file on the hard drive. More information on these keys can be found in the Windows 95 SDK. However, for network administrators, the key feature of System Monitor is its ability to monitor a remote system. This capability is built upon remote registry access, since performance data is registered with the system using dynamic keys contained within the Windows 95 registry. For example, if a network administrator is attempting to troubleshoot a slow PC, they can remotely discern that the NIC has an unusually high number of dropped frames. They can then use the registry editing tool to see how the network card is configured. System Monitor can show performance statistics on remote computers using the RPC-enabled Win32 registry APIs built into Windows 95. This is the same capability as remote registry editing. You install the remote registry service on both the network administrator and client computers, as we discussed earlier. System Monitor uses RPC to send the registry API call over the various RPC transport mechanisms, NetBIOS or IPX. The name pipes transport mechanism is not used since Windows 95 does not ship with server-side name pipe support, similar to Workgroups. In the slide example, Strawberry 5 is the network administrator using Sysmon to remotely view performance statistics on Lexington. WinReg DLL is the RPC stub for both regedit and regserve. Both computers must have installed the remote registry service. So I'm going to go ahead and look at Lex's machine and see how busy he is. So I'm going to go to the Start menu, and Programs and Accessories, and System Tools, and there's System Monitor. Now again, I installed this on this machine when I set up the computer here, but this is not installed by default. It's just part of the Accessories group when you install Windows 95. Go ahead and open System Monitor. And on my local machine here, I can see how big my disk cache is and how much of my processor is being utilized. So let's just let it sit here a second and gather some information. You know, my machine's not too busy here on the processor. A little bit. We'll hook up now remotely to Lex's machine and see if he's up to anything. So I click on OK, and again we're going over RPC. And now on the top here, you see on the title bar it says Lexington. So now I'm seeing whatever's going on Lex's machine, whatever he's doing, I can look in the System Monitor and determine if something maybe is going wrong, or I can look in this case, it seems he's very busy. His processor's at 100% utilization, and his disk cache is at about, it looks about 4 megs or so. Or I can also go in and look and see, for instance, there's some other items we can open up in System Monitor, such as the file system. It's querying Lex's machine to get the information, and I could look at the bytes written, bytes read, things like that, different network items, the Microsoft client, things like that. Anything I could look at my local machine, I could look at Lex's machine also. NetWatcher allows local and remote management of user connections to Windows 95 peer services. The tool shows all current connections to the Windows 95 system and who is connected and which files or printers are in use. NetWatcher also allows you to view and manage its shares remotely. Unlike remote registry editing, remote management of shares does not require user-level security to be enabled, though you probably would still want to have it enabled. The following diagram shows the basic architecture of how NetWatcher is used over the network and what components and steps are used. Once authentication occurs, the administrator's name is checked against the Lexington admin $sign share. This share is also used to check user rights, and once that has been done, any access to the machine is approved. If the computer you are monitoring is using user-level security, then to remotely administer it with NetWatcher, both computers must be running the same server. That means both machines must be running either the SMB server or the NCP server. Both computers must also be using the same security provider or have trust relationships set up on the NT servers. So now I'm going to go ahead and look at the NetWatcher on my machine and see what I'm sharing. So again, we go to Start, and Programs, and Accessories, and System Tools, and there's NetWatcher. And on my machine right now, click on the button over here that says Show Shared Folders. I can see, oh yeah, stretch this here a little bit. I can see I have two shares. I've got a Documents folder shared called Lemon Pie, and it's set up to be user-level security. And I also have the post office that earlier I used to send Lex the email message. Also, if there were files open, I could click over here on Show Files, and I could see exactly what's going on with that file in the access mode that it's in. To view all shares on a given Windows 95 computer, you can select View by Shared Folders from the View menu, And you also want to note that shares with $sign as the last character of the share name and RPC connections are not shown in this UI. An important new feature of NetWatcher is the ability to view the share mode that was used when a file is opened on the share. You'd select View by Open Files from NetWatcher's menu bar. This information can aid in troubleshooting network file access of applications or data in shared directories. Now, unlike the Windows for Workgroup 3.11 version of NetWatcher, the Windows 95 NetWatcher does not have the ability to view a network log or auditing. Okay, so right now I need to get a file off a Lexus machine, PowerPoint slide actually for this show. So Lex.
Yeah, Mike.
Can you share a file for me?
Man, I'd love to, but right now I'm way too busy. I'm working on this document that I have to get finished. I wish I could, but I'm sorry.
Okay, I saw you pretty busy earlier. I looked in Sysmon, you are pretty busy. I'll go ahead and do it myself, all right, Lex?
Okay.
Thanks. So on my machine now, I'm going to go into NetWatcher, and I go to Administer, select Server. I'm going to look at Lexington, that's Lex's machine. You notice now on the title bar it says 3 shared folders on Lexington, that's Lex's computer. And I can see actually what Lex has shared, which, this is kind of interesting. It says, don't tell Mike this is shared. Well, I think I'm going to get rid of that. Let's see what's in there. Shared folder properties. Lex has access to this. I could actually connect and I could add myself and connect and see what's in there, but I'm just going to get rid of it. I don't like the idea. It says, don't tell Mike this is shared. Oh, okay. See you, Lex. Got rid of that share. Now I'm going to add a share for myself to get to the Traincast PowerPoints. Go to Add and Browse, and you can see we've got a $C here, and that's basically Lex's hard drive shared out with the admin rights. And then we have 2 other shares that Lex had on there earlier, the Disco Songs and Dustin's. So I'll double click on C, and I can go through and see the different subdirectories on Lex's machine, or folders. Go to Traincast, click OK. And now this is the path I'm going to actually share on Lex's machine. And I'm going to share it as Traincast. And by default, there's no names in here. I'm going to add myself. I'm going to give myself full access to that share. I could also pick any group that my security provider provides. We're obtaining a user list from Midway. Click OK. OK again, and now Lex has 3 shares, and I can hook up to the Traincast directory. So let's make sure that works. I'll go into Network Neighborhood. It's going to browse the network, find the machines. There's Lexington. And double click on there. Since I'm hooked up as admin still, it shows me the C $ share. I'm going to go ahead and connect to Traincast, and there's my PowerPoint slide. I can just copy that to my desktop here if I want. There we go. Windows 95 also ships with an agent for the Microsoft Network Monitor. That's a software-based protocol analyzer that's shipped with Microsoft's System Management Server product. The Windows 95 Network Monitor agent records general network broadcast statistics in the system monitor. The Network Monitor agent can also be used by a network monitor computer to do remote protocol analyzing. Protocol analyzers can only analyze the network to which they're attached and cannot see network traffic across routers. Windows 95 Network Monitor Agent allows a Windows 95 workstation to send network analysis information from a client to a network monitor computer across a router. The network monitor is installed as a service through Control Panel Networks. So I'll go ahead and do it. It's not installed by default. I'm going to Control Panel, Networks. You're pretty busy there, Lex.
Yeah, I am.
And we'll go to Add, Service. And you'll notice in here that it's not in here by default. So I say Have Disk, as I've done earlier. I'm going to point to my local drive. I'm going to point to the admin directory. And under Net Tools, there'll be a Netmon agent. Microsoft Network Monitor, and I can click OK, and it'll add it in. Or I also could have added this service in with the batch INF. In a server-based client backup scenario, the Windows 95 workstation runs a backup agent that allows a backup program running on a network server to back up the Windows 95 workstation. The backup data is copied across the network from the workstation to the network server, and then is copied to a tape unit connected to the network server. Server-based backup has the advantage of centralizing the backup resources to a single tape backup unit on the server, and backups can be done by MIS personnel on a regular schedule. Windows 95 supports two backup agents, the Arcadia Backup Agent for Arcadia Backup Exec for Novell NetWare, and the Cheyenne Backup Agent for Cheyenne ArcServe for NetWare. Note, Windows 95 only ships with the Windows 95 Backup Agent software. The server-based backup program is a separate product that must be purchased and configured correctly before attempting to back up Windows 95 workstations. To use the Arcadia agent, you must have the following components. To back up a Windows 95 workstation using the Arcadia agent, you must install the Arcadia Backup Exec on the NetWare server, install the updated NLMs from the Arcadia BBS, install the Arcadia agent on the Windows 95 workstation, and then run the Arcadia Backup Exec program on the NetWare server and back up the workstation. To use the Cheyenne agent, you must follow similar steps. To back up a Windows 95 workstation using the Cheyenne agent, you must install the Cheyenne ArcServe on the NetWare server, install the updated NLMs obtained from Cheyenne, install the Cheyenne agent on the Windows 95 workstation, and then run the Cheyenne ArcServe program on the NetWare server and back up the workstation. Windows 95 also includes support for remotely administering HP JetDirect printers. These printers are connected directly to the network. With the Jet Admin service installed, you can remotely control HP JetDirect printers through a utility in Control Panel. You can install the backup agents and HP Jet Admin during a batch setup script by including the service items in the network section of the script as described in the Appendix D of the Windows 95 Resource Kit. In this segment, we have looked at the various tools such as System Monitor, Regedit, and NetWatcher for making Windows 95 easier to remotely administer. In the next segment, User Profiles and System Policies, we'll show you how you can create roving user desktops or limit a user's desktop from a single location.
System policies control what users can and cannot do on the desktop and on the network. I am in the process of building a Windows 95 migration plan for a computer lab here in the Seattle area. One of the biggest problems the lab administrators have is that inexperienced users often delete icons from the desktop or delete important files from the system. Users also often bring unapproved or illegal copies of MS-DOS games into the lab and install them. The lab administrators spend a lot of time and money fixing these troublesome problems. I used the information on the TechNet CD to help me establish system policies for the computer lab that will fix these problems. Because this information is on the TechNet CD before the release of the product, I've been able to make decisions about the default set of system policies before the lab begins installing Windows 95. When implemented, these system policies will provide the following benefits for the computer lab. System policies will be automatically downloaded when the user logs on to the Windows network. Decisions on what users can and can't change can be decided on and administered centrally on the server machine. The network administrator will be able to centrally customize areas of the desktop where users can cause trouble, such as the Control Panel, Network Neighborhood, and the Start menu. Unapproved copies of MS-DOS applications brought into the lab by users also won't be able to be used. Let's take a look at the information on the TechNet CD that is helping me design these system policies. I used bookmarks, a feature of the TechNet CD, to help me keep track of the topics I was using. Planning for the rollout of user profiles and system policies is covered in the product review and comparison documentation here. This information helped me explain system policies and user profiles to the lab managers and let them know how these Windows 95 features would make their job easier. Chapter 15, User Profiles and System Policies, discussed issues that I should think about before using system policies. It helped me decide if I want to use the system policies or mandatory user profiles, and helped me decide what types of settings I want to define and manage centrally. It also showed me how to set up automatic downloading of system policies from the Windows NT server machine in the lab. Chapter 13, Introduction to System Management, helped introduce me to the tools I would need to use to build these system policies, like the System Policies Editor. Information on troubleshooting specific areas of system policies is covered in the knowledge base articles, such as this one. Other information on the TechNet CD that helped me build system policies into the Windows 95 lab environment includes samples of policies for Windows networks and specific issues on system policies covered in the knowledge base. The TechNet CD-ROM is updated monthly to make sure you have access to new information as it becomes available and as new issues arise. You may be interested in how these features work across a Novell network. Implementing user profiles on a Novell network will be covered in the August issue of TechNet when we present Traincast number 5, Windows 95 and NetWare on the CD. Thanks for tuning in to the TechNet Tips portion of the Traincast broadcast. If successfully deploying Windows 95 within your organization is important to you, then you won't want to miss the special Windows 95 issue of TechNet in August. The special issue will include the Windows 95 Resource Kit and Utilities, a Tips and Tricks guide written by the Windows 95 product team, a Windows 95 troubleshooting setup guide, the complete Windows 95 knowledge base, a Windows 95 training course for beginning users, and past Traincast like Windows 95 and NetWare and remote administration online. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Mary. Call your authorized reseller at 1-800-344-2121, Department 3121, to order TechNet. If you call by July 17th, you will receive the August Windows 95 Special Edition containing over 2,600 pages of technical information on Windows 95. Mike and Frank have joined me once again for our question and answer session. It looks like our engineers have been busy. Remember, our engineers are available throughout the show. Just call 206-635-7066 with your questions, and we'll try to answer them as soon as we can. Frank, why don't we start with you? We had an interesting call a few minutes ago. Somebody is watching us on their backyard satellite dish,
really?
and they're a single user. They don't have a whole organization. Are there things of significance and value for them on this show as a single user?
Well, that's really interesting. First of all, I thought we had only like the IS management watching this show, but it's great to see that we have some single users out there. Before I answer that question, though, I'd like to correct something I said earlier. We were talking about the acronym NTFS. It's NT file system, not NetWare file system. Had a little NetWare on the brain there. But for this single user out there, actually, in the third section of today's show, again, we're going over user profiles and system policy editor, and that's something that's really beneficial in an environment, even like a home, where you want to control the environment from your children so that they don't fool around with some of the settings. You can do that through the policy editor, or you can just set up your profiles so that your one computer looks different for, let's say, dad, mom, and the kids. So there is some stuff in this show that even you can use at home. And that's about it, I would say.
Okay, great. We had a call from a help desk person who is out in Plano, Texas. Lana is her name, and she wanted to know. She was really intrigued with the way the registry is involved in changes, and she wants to know, when I edit a user's registry remotely, where will the backups be kept? And as a help desk professional, she's real focused on that issue.
Right. I think we're all used to an undo command with a lot of Windows applications, and regedit, being more of a power tool, doesn't have an undo option. So especially when you're doing this remotely, when you're doing remote registry editing and you're modifying someone's registry, it's pretty important to make sure you edit the right thing, because there's not really an undo. There are still backup files, or DA0 files, that are stored on the client, but then you'd have to go over to that machine and get those. So something to be aware of.
And I have a real sense that help desk professionals and support professionals are going to find the registry a real valuable piece. I know from just the whole diagnostic process to be able to go in and really see what's going on, as you were doing with Lex's, Lex's machine a little bit. How did he do on pinball, by the way?
I didn't look to see what a score had.
We have a question, Frank, from Alex in Washington, and wanted to know, what disk compressions does Windows 95 work with?
Oh, that's an interesting question for the show, but if I can remember, it's drive space, double space, stacker 3.0, 4.x, and I think support Superstore, that was it. Superstore was the compression algorithms that we're working with, and all the tools that we're showing today, they also work well with these compression algorithms. There's no outstanding issues, so I think that should answer his question.
Let me just take a moment. I know we were chatting before during the break on the whole way in which laptops seem to be just much more powerful now that I put the compression on my laptop, and suddenly it was like I had space I never had before in that, and I've been finding that to be a real cool part of of the Windows 95 opportunity.
Especially with the Plus pack. I mean, they have a special compression algorithm there optimized for the Pentium chip. And I mean, great compression, absolutely wonderful. I found myself hitting my ceiling pretty quick after I had all my apps installed, and I used the compression algorithm there, and it's been, you know, a big space saver for me.
And what I liked was that I didn't see much erosion in performance in that process. That it was by being able to have variable levels of compression.
Yeah, you can customize it. That's a great thing. So you can actually say, you know, files. For me, the way I do it is files that are, let's say, I haven't accessed in like 15 days get high compression, while those that I'm using more recently don't. So.
Great. Sean from Toronto wants to know, I try to remotely use a network monitor agent with Windows 95. Sean can't seem to get a trace from the remote machine. Any advice for Sean?
Right. I can take a guess here. I think the issue is probably the NM agent exe. We don't run that by default after you install the network monitor agent, and that exe has to be running on the client machine to get remote traces. And sometimes that's left off, and so you can't see the machine remotely with network monitor.
Got you. Phil, why don't we do one more for you? We had a call from Karen in Boston, Massachusetts, and Karen wanted to know, I want to add other items to the system monitor. How do I do that?
Right. System monitor, as I was talking about earlier, just exposes information from VXDs in the system. And so basically the issue there is the VXD writer specifies what performance options can show up in the UI. So really, only the VXD writers can add new information to the system monitor, but that's documented in the Windows 95 DDK, and so a VXD writer can just implement performance options.
And I'll do a jargon buster.
Sorry. DDK Device Development Kit.
Great, great, super. And Frank, we had a call from John in Atlanta, and John wanted to know, with Windows 95, will he still have to synchronize multiple configurations to start his computer?
Well, it really depends on the apps and the hardware that you're running. The situation is much improved having the central repository for information with the registry. All those like Win95 apps, the 32-bit apps, the plug-and-play devices, all of them will be storing their settings information into the registry. So that's a really good news. But if you're looking at the older apps, the MS-DOS apps, and the devices that really still require the real mode drivers, those devices and applications really don't know about the registry, and so they're going to be still using the INI, the config.sys file, to store their information. So the situation there for the administrator is really status quo.
Got you. And we have one more. Eric from Aurora, New York wanted to know, does the Windows 95 backup program work with the backup agents in Windows 95? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, those are actually two different animals. The backup program in Windows 95 is designed for local backup using floppy or tape drive. The backup agents are designed that I can have a tape backup on a central file server and then remotely gather the information from all the clients. So they're two different things. They don't really interoperate together. One's for more of a home user, local user type thing, and one's more for a network.
Great. Well, we're at the halfway point here, and that's all the time that we have for questions during this segment. Now, I know you're going to be glad to hear it. We're going to take a 15-minute break right now. And remember, you can still call 206-635-7066 anytime during today's shows. Our Windows 95 engineers are there to answer your questions, so give us a call. It's 206-635-7066, and we'll be back in later segments to answer some of those. Now, before our actual break, we would like to list the many support options I mentioned at the beginning of the program. So go ahead, grab a pen and paper. We're going to tell you how you can get your hands on these wonderful Windows 95 resources, and we'll see you again in 15 minutes.
If you'd like to subscribe to Microsoft's Win News electronic newsletter, send internet email to enews@microsoft.nwnet.com with the words "Subscribe Win News" as the only text in the body of your message. Win News file sections can also be found on most major online services. There are a number of electronic distribution points that contain information directly from Microsoft about Windows 95. Use the following electronic addresses for new white papers, press releases, and other documentation. The transcript, content outline, and PowerPoint slides of this broadcast will be available on CompuServe and the World Wide Web at these addresses. To receive the Microsoft project template for deployment of Windows 95, send your name, company name, address, phone, and fax numbers via the internet to deploy95@microsoft.com. The Microsoft project template is also available on CompuServe, Go, MSTV Forum, Windows 95 Library. The title is Win95p.zip. To receive a beta version of the Windows 95 Resource Kit, or for more information about this kit, call 1-800-315-0676. Inside Windows 95 by Adrian King is available for $24.95 at most major bookstores or by calling 1-800-MS-PRESS. To get a program guide for Microsoft TV with information on business-to-business television programs from Microsoft, email us at mstv@microsoft.com. or call 1-800-597-3200. Order Microsoft TechNet by July 17th and receive the August Windows 95 Special Edition. The August issue will contain over 2,600 pages of technical information for Windows 95, including the Windows 95 Resource Kit, Windows 95 support for Novell, Windows 95 training materials, Windows 95 remote administration features, Microsoft TechEd 95 conference materials, Windows 95 troubleshooting setup guide, and more. Call your authorized reseller or 800-344-2121, Department 3121. You can also view a subset of TechNet on the World Wide Web at this address. To order a videotape of today's program, or any in the Windows 95 Traincast series, call 1-800-597-3200. The Windows 95 Traincast series on videotape is a handy reference resource for your migration, implementation, and operation of Microsoft's Windows 95 operating system. Once again, to order any or all of the videotapes in the Windows 95 Traincast series, call toll-free 1-800-597-3200. We're always anxious to hear your comments on the Windows 95 Traincast series, as well as other programs offered by Microsoft TV. Please contact us via the internet at mstv@microsoft.com or call us toll-free at 1-800-597-3200. We'll be back with more of Windows 95 Traincast in a few moments. In the meantime, our Traincast question and answer phone lines are still open. Call 206-635-7066 You still have ample opportunity to win a full multimedia computer system from Dell. Just answer this question. Name the feature of Microsoft's Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. Here it is again. Name the feature of Microsoft's Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. When you have the answer, call toll-free 1-800-254-4069. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Windows 95 Traincast is sponsored in part by Dell Computer Corporation. Here's today's question for your chance to win a complete multimedia computer system from Dell. Name the feature of Microsoft's Windows 95 that allows you to access parameters for all users on your network. Call us toll-free at 1-800-254-4069 when you have the answer. Once again, here's Elliott Masie.
Hi, if you missed the first half of the show, which I hope you didn't, but if you did, videotapes of this program and past Windows 95 Traincast programs are available by calling us at 1-800-597-3200. At the end of today's program, we'll list the various titles from all the Traincast series and how you can order the shows that you want. In this segment, Michael will discuss user profiles and system policies and how they function and interact in Windows 95. Take it away, Mike.
In the previous segment, we talked about the remote admin tools such as System Monitor and NetWatcher. I also mentioned a tool called Policy Editor, which I'll go into more detail now. Windows 95 offers a very powerful method for centrally controlling Windows 95 machines and at the same time providing users with flexibility on how they might like their personal desktop to look. There is also support for these features anywhere on the network a user may be connected at. In the past Traincast show, Windows 95 and NetWare, Joe Davies mentioned some of the features of user passwords in Windows 95. When talking about user profiles or system policies, we first must look at the Windows 95 password features. If we plan on controlling the desktop, While providing a user-customized desktop, we have to know who the person logging into the machine is. In Windows 95, there is one central place you can go to change your network passwords or any passwords. Go to Start, Settings, Control Panel, Passwords. There are two options on the dialog. You can change the Windows logon, local logon password and sync other passwords with it, or you can change individual passwords. In past versions of Windows, you would have changed the network password and the network icon in Control Panel. Now you can go to one place to change or sync your screensaver, network, or other passwords that might be on your system. I've got 3 passwords on the system right now: the local Windows logon password, my Windows NT password, and my screensaver. They're all different right now. That means I have to remember 3 different passwords. Yuck. It would be easier for me to create one password for all of them. I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to go in and change my Windows password. And when I click on Change Windows Password, it gives me a choice to sync up the other passwords on my system that I currently have, which is my screensaver and my Windows NT password. I'll click OK. It's asked me for my old Windows logon password, which is kitty cat. And I'm going to put in Beagle for the new password. Press OK. It says my Windows password has been successfully changed. And everything should be fine now. So for example, we'll go and look at the screensaver now. And we'll preview it. I type in Beagle, and the screensaver goes away. So now my Windows NT password, my local logon password, and my screensaver password are all the same. Now password providers and password APIs can be synced, but it's not a strict master PWL system like Windows for Workgroups. Changing a password just calls a registered password provider. The password provider is listed in the registry key, HKey local machine, system, current control set, control, and password provider. Windows 95 does not control the password. It is up to each password provider listed in the key to properly function. Windows 95 just offers a consistent UI and API for changing passwords. Windows NT and Windows for Workgroups look differently. So I'm going to look at Lex's machine and see what he has in for his password providers. So we go to the Start button, go to Run, and I'll type in regedit, and I'll hook up to Lex's machine remotely, which is Lexington. It's going to take a few seconds to verify I have access to Lex's machine. Okay, and now we're going to look and find the password provider. And there it is. And on Lex's machine, he has 3 of them listed too right now. He's got a screensaver password, NetWare password, and a Microsoft NT password. And as you can see here, if other applications wanted to register themselves in this list, they would just add a registry key, and they could add other password change options that would show up in that password UI. So an application vendor could add their own entries here for their password handler and could allow users to sync up the password with other system passwords the user may have. The real benefit is there is one location for users to go to change passwords. The user does not need to learn or use different UI for changing passwords for each item. User profiles in Windows 95 addresses 2 problems not addressed in Windows version 3.x. Number 1, we need a way of defining and preserving individualized configuration settings for more than one user on a particular computer, custom configurations for each user of a single desktop computer. Each user can define the way they want to use Windows 95. The user's preferences are saved to a profile which Windows 95 uses to configure the desktop each time the user logs on. When a second user logs on to the same computer with a different username, Windows 95 creates a separate user profile for that user. Number 2, we needed a way for defining and preserving individualized configuration settings for users who use more than one computer on the network, creating configurations that follow the roving user. Windows 95 also provides support for roving users who do not necessarily use the same computer every day, but who want to use the same desktop configuration on whichever computer they are using to log in. A roving user's user profile is stored on a network server and downloaded to any computer on the network to which the user logs on. For rover user functionality to work, the user must log on to the same security provider, either a Windows NT domain or network server, where their user account is located. A user profile contains configuration preferences and options for an individual user. User profile settings include everything in the HKey current user section of the Windows 95 registry, or the user.dat. Windows 95 settings, including settings for desktop layout, background, font selection, colors, and so forth, and network settings, including settings for persistent network connections and application settings that are written to the HKey current user hive, including settings for menu and toolbar configurations, font, Windows configuration preference, and so forth. Should note, application settings that follow the user are only applicable if the application knows how to write its configuration settings into the HKey current user hive. If these settings are written to an INI file or elsewhere in the registry, they will be computer-specific instead of user-specific. A user profile can also include other non-registry items, such as shortcuts on the desktop, network neighborhood contents, servers that have been added to the network neighborhood but are not in the user's workgroup, and also links and PIFs appearing in the Start menu and Programs folder. A user profile does not include folders on the desktop, program exes on the desktop, or network protocols or drivers. Those would be only part of the local profile on that machine. Folders and programs on the desktop are not saved as part of the user profile, and therefore do not follow the roving user. Network protocols are not saved either. However, network adapters may be saved as specific hardware profiles. User profiles work seamlessly when a user logs on to a Windows 95 computer. Upon logon, Windows 95 checks for a user profile for the username logging on. If there's a match, that configuration information is loaded into the registry, creating a desktop customized for the user. So let's see this in action. So Lex, log out and log in as me as Grand Poobah with password Beagle.
Grand Poobah, huh?
Yep. You
Okay.
get to be Grand Poobah.
All right. Beagle?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, Beagle.
What Lex is seeing here is that his local PWL file for Grand Poobah has an incorrect password. And actually, I logged into that machine earlier with the password kittycat. And that PWL file is not part of the user profile, so Lex is going to have to type in kittycat.
Kittycat, okay. Ah. Oh, look, the tip screen. Cool.
Okay, so Lex, you notice the desktop icon showed up. Why do you think that is?
Because my brilliant system administrator made a mistake.
That's a good guess, Lex. But this has to do with what user profile options are enabled on your system. So let's go ahead and look at your user profile settings on this computer.
Okay, user profiles. That would be Start, Settings, Control Panel, Passwords, User Profiles.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
And as you can see, Lex has all the user profile settings turned on, which includes the desktop icons.
Cool. Hey, you know what? I just thought of something. That means I can modify Mike's icons.
Thanks, Lex. Roving users must keep in mind that exes, data files, or other components do not follow the user from machine to machine. If a user wishes to have access to a program or data file from anywhere on the network, they should keep it on a network server and point a shortcut to it. So let's see this in action. So Lex, my cool desktop wallpaper didn't show up on your desktop. Why do you think that is?
Because only system administrators get cool desktops.
Well, that's another good guess, Lex. But what you're seeing, though, is that the user.dat file is pointing to a wallpaper bitmap that you don't have on your machine, so it just comes up blank.
Oh, cool. Hey, Mike, could you share that for me on the net?
Gee, Lex, I'm way too busy right now. Windows 95 offers the ability for roving users to move from a Windows 95 computer to another Windows 95 computer and maintain their desktop settings, but does not offer the ability to move between Windows NT workstations and a Windows 95 computer. Windows 95 user profiles and Windows NT profiles are completely separate and do not interoperate. If the user profile is stored on a network location, Windows 95 will look in a user-specific place on the network to retrieve the network copy of the user profile. When user profiles are enabled, a new user logs on and accepts to create a new profile. Windows 95 creates a hidden Windows Profiles directory. As users log on to the Windows 95 computer, it creates a directory structure under Profiles corresponding to the user logon name and store the user profile settings. This path is also stored in the following registry location: HKey local machine, software, Microsoft, Windows, current version, profile reconciliation. Only when a user creates a new profile does the default directory structure get copied to the Windows Profiles username directory. Otherwise, directories and files remain in the Windows directory for the default user not accessing a user profile. So these are the folders and items that used in the user profile. We've got the user.dat and user.da0, and the da0 is a backup of user.dat. We've got the desktop directory containing desktop shortcuts, though only if you include desktop icons in the user profile settings. We've got the nethood directory containing shortcuts to machines the user adds, again only if we include the desktop icons is checked from the user profile settings. We've got a recent directory containing links to recently loaded files, though only if include desktop icons is checked from the user profiles. And we also have a start menu directory containing the structure of the program menus from the start button, though only if include start menu is selected in the user profile settings. So I'm going to log out and see what Lex did to my machine. Okay, still should be Beagle. Takes a second here. I've got to type in my NetWare password. Oh, Lex added a Space Cadet table to my desktop. Let's go ahead and take a look at where that's stored at. To the C drive, into the Windows directory. And remember, Profiles is a hidden directory, so in my shell I've turned on the ability to see these hidden directories. Go to Profiles, Grand Poobah, and Desktop, and you can see there we've got the Space Cadet shortcut. Each time the user logs on, Windows 95 searches the registry under Profile List Registry key for the username of the person logging in. If found, the user profile information is loaded from the appropriate Profiles username directory, and the desktop configuration is set accordingly to the desktop and program settings in the user profile. If no entry in the profile list registry is found for the person currently logging on, and that person wishes to create a new profile, Windows 95 updates the profile list registry key with the username and uses the default settings from the Windows directory to create a new user profile under the user Windows Profiles username directory. Now, shared Windows 95 computers also have a Windows Profile directory structure on the local Windows 95 computer with subdirectories for each user who logs on. Now, separate copies of an individual user's user profile are also kept in a user-specific directory on a network server. If the network user-specific directory on a network server is available during logon, it is checked for a user profile. If the user-specific directory on a network server is not available, then the local copy of the user profile in the Windows Profiles directory is used. So there's always a Windows Profiles directory on a Windows 95 machine. Windows 95 decides which type of network server to check for a user profile based on the primary network logon setting in Control Panel Networks. If Windows 95 is configured for the client for Microsoft Networks as the primary network logon, the Windows NT domain is checked. If Windows 95 is configured for the client for NetWare Networks as the primary network logon, the preferred network server is checked. So hey Lex, can you check for me and see what your primary logon client is set for?
Sure, absolutely. Let's see, I'll go to Network Neighborhood Properties. And it looks like my primary network logon client is the client for Microsoft Networks.
Thanks, Lex.
Sure. Hey Mike, could you share that bitmap with me now?
Oh, I'm still way too busy, Lex.
Okay.
Note, the primary network logon setting is stored in the HKey local machine and therefore is computer-specific and not user-specific. In a mixed client environment, it is possible to have one computer configured for the client for NetWare Networks as the primary network logon, getting its user profiles off a NetWare server, and another computer configured for the client for Windows Networks as the primary network logon, getting its user profiles off a Windows NT domain share. In this case, the settings only follow the user from computer to computer if they have manually synchronized the user profiles between the network server and the Windows NT domain share. Therefore, it's recommended that all computers be configured for the same primary network logon when using user profiles. Now, when the user logs off, Windows 95 copies the user profile and profile's username to the server. If the user logs on to a different computer, as we've seen here, the user profile is downloaded from the server. This functionality allows the user to rove and have their custom desktop follow them around the network. The user maintains their desktop configuration regardless of which computer they log on to. When the user logs on, Windows 95 first checks the user profile found in Profile's username, and then the user profile on the server. Windows 95 compares the two sets of profiles using the briefcase synchronization engine. And Windows 95 then picks the most recent version of the files. If a local user profile exists in the profiles and a copy does not exist on the server, Windows 95 uses the local version of the user profile from Profile's username. If no user profile exists on the server and there is no local version, Windows 95 creates a new user profile in the Profile's username directory using default settings from the Windows directory. On a default installation, this points to the desktop, NetHood, Send To, and Start menu directories relative to the Windows directory. When the user logs off, Windows 95 uses the briefcase synchronization engine to copy the updated local profiles files from the Profiles directory to the user-specific directory on the server. Now, on a Windows NT domain network, the user-specific directory is searched for the user's profile in the home directory for each user account specified by the network administrator. During the logon process to the Windows NT domain, the Windows 95 computer obtains the UNC connection, or Universal Naming Convention location, of the home directory and then creates a UNC connection to the home directory to begin the comparing and downloading process. To set up user profiles for a Windows NT domain network, you need to ensure each user is properly set up with a home directory. Windows 95 administrators can use the User Manager tool to create this directory. On the user's computer, from Control Panel Network, as we've seen, you need to ensure that Client for Windows Networks is installed and is the primary network logon. When these three conditions are met, upon logon, Windows 95 will now create and update the user profile in the UNC connection destination to the home directory. So let's look at the directory used here on the NT server in the earlier demo. So on the NT server, go ahead and open it up. And I've created a user's directory, and right here we've got Grand Poobah. If we look here, we've got the desktop directory and reset and start menu. And over here we've got, as Lex added, the Space Cadet shortcut. So as you can see, the information is being copied up to the network server, or the NT server, and then copied down to my local machine. You should note, Windows 95 does not use the Profiles directory on an NT server. That is only used for Windows NT profiles. Now, on a network server, the user-specific directory that is searched for a user's user profile is usually in the sys, mail, and user ID directory. Whenever a user account is created with the Novell syscon utility, the user account is issued an 8-digit hexadecimal user ID number. Now, the syscon utility automatically creates a user ID directory under sysmail and then grants the user read-writes access to that directory. The sysmail user ID directory can be used for Novell email programs, but without email, it is only used to store the user login script and user print job configurations. Now, during the logon process to the preferred network server, the Windows 95 computer obtains the user ID and creates a connection to preferred server sysmail user ID to begin the comparing and downloading process. To set up user profiles for a network, you need to ensure each user on the Novell server has a sysmail user ID directory to which they have full rights to read and create and delete files and directories. This setup is usually not necessary since the creation and assignment of the rights is performed automatically by syscon. On the user's computer, from Control Panel Network, you need to ensure that the client for networks is installed as the primary network logon. When these three conditions are met, upon logon to the network server, Windows 95 creates and updates the user profile in the preferred server name sysmail user ID directory. User profiles are a function of the MPR DLL file and the 32-bit network providers. Third-party vendors must provide support for the API calls MPR makes when attempting to get user profiles off of a network server into their network providers. Third-party networks must also provide a home directory equivalent for storing the individual user profiles. So let's see how this all works. Past Traincast shows that dealt with Windows 95 and networking presented by Autumn Womack and Joe Davies mentioned the MPR and network providers in Windows 95. User configurations during the boot process consist of 3 separate processes initiated by MPR DLL, the multiple provider router. First, the user must be identified, and MPR looks to the primary network logon client, in this case MSNet32DLL in the example, for a provider-specific logon dialog box. Next, the desktop is configured using user profiles. MPR looks to the primary network logon client for a location on the network where the individual's user configuration files are stored. If found, they are downloaded to the local system. If not found, MPR checks for a user configuration on the local machine to use. If this is not available, MPR uses the default user profile. And finally, the registry is modified according to the system policies of the network administrator. MPR again looks to the primary network logon client for a location on the network where the system policies can be found. If found, the registry settings corresponding to the system policies are made to the local registry. The end result is that the user has been identified and has received their user desktop settings, user profiles, and the system policies. MPR facilitates this configuration process by calling functions within the primary network login client. Let's look at Lex's machine and make sure that he set his primary login client to client for Microsoft Networks. So I'm going to go ahead and run regedit, and remotely I'm going to hook up to Lex's machine. Takes a couple seconds to verify that I have access to Lex's computer to do this. Go under HKey local machine, and under network, logon, it's going to list the primary provider, which Lex was in line, it's the Microsoft network. In Windows 95, a mandatory profile can be used to give all the Windows 95 computers the same look and feel, or universal desktop, or to keep specific users from permanently changing their desktop settings. When using mandatory user profiles, Windows 95 does not update the network server version from when the user logs off. A mandatory user profile consists of a user.man, which is basically a renamed user.dat, and optionally desktop, recent, and start menu directories. The file name of user.man indicates to a Windows 95 computer that a mandatory profile rather than a user modified profile is being used. When the user logs on, Windows 95 checks for a local profile and then checks for the server version. When it sees that the mandatory user profiles are being used, it copies from the server to the profiles directory. If the network server or user-specific directory is not available when the user logs on, a local copy of the user profile in the local profiles directory is used. Now, the login process, if the user makes changes to their desktop during the logon session and logs off, these changes are saved to the profiles directory but are not saved to the mandatory profile in their user-specific directory on the server. This feature helps network administrators create a standard desktop and ensure its implementation every time a user logs on. To configure mandatory profiles, you first must enable user profiles. From any Windows 95 computer, customize the desktop as you plan to have it for your mandatory user profile, and then copy the user profile or the user.dat, start menu, desktop, and recent directories to a holding area. Rename user.dat to user.man. To implement user profiles, mandatory user profiles on a Windows NT domain, copy user.man, the start menu, desktop, and recent directories from the holding area to each user's home directory for which you wish to implement mandatory user profiles. Now, to implement mandatory user profiles on a NetWare server, you copy the user man, start menu, desktop, and recent directories from the holding area to each user's sysmail user ID directory for which you want to implement mandatory user profiles. Now note, Windows 95's mandatory profiles are not the same as Windows NT mandatory profiles. They have the same functionality, however, In Windows NT, a mandatory profile is any profile with a star.man extension. In Windows 95, the mandatory user profile must be named user.man. Windows NT mandatory profiles are not interchangeable with the Windows 95 mandatory profiles. System policies offer a powerful mechanism for network administrators to increase control and manageability of desktop computers across the enterprise. By establishing system policies, network administrators can control access to the network, specify desktop configurations, and prevent users from modifying preset applications or desktop configurations. For example, an administrator might preset a user's environment so that the MS-DOS prompt is unavailable, or so that users cannot run network peer services. In Windows 95, administrators can choose from a default set of system policies, or they can create their own custom system policies. System policies now give network administrators more control over their users' desktops than ever before. The implementation of system policies is a multi-step process where the final result is that a set of policies is available on the network, and any user who logs on will get the policies implemented on their computer. Step 1 is creating the policies. For policies to be enabled and used on any given computer, user profiles must also be enabled. You need to refer to the previous section on how we enabled user profiles. The policies must be created and stored in a file. This file can be manually specified for each computer, but it is more efficient to place a central file on a predefined network location and have the policies implemented as part of the network logon process. Now, Step 1A is specifying individual users. Now, for flexibility, it's useful to be able to distinguish individual users and implement specific policies for individual users and groups. Now, Step 1B is specifying individual computers. And for flexibility, it is useful to be able to distinguish between individual computers and implement specific policies corresponding to different computer configurations. Step 1C is specifying groups to facilitate administration of policies to departments. It is useful to be able to set policies for groups and users. Now, Step 2 is distributing the policies. Once a central policy file is created, it is placed on a global access point on the network. Each network type has the concept of a global access point that all users can log on and create and can access. An example is the syspublic directory on a network server. Step 3 is the user logon. When users log on, the logon process checks their global access point for the central system policy file and copies the settings for their username and computer name, or defaults, into the local registry. The implementation of policies is global and seamless to the user. You should note, group policy support is not available in the client by default. To get group policy support on a Windows 95 client, you can either add the item through Add Remove Programs, or you can copy the group pol.dll file and add the registry keys in a batch setup as defined in the Windows 95 Resource Kit. Now, by enabling system policies in a Windows 95 network, administrators have a tremendous amount of control over the desktop. They can control users' desktops, network, and security settings. Any settings that are defined are automatically updated in the registry upon login. The desktop settings you define modify the HKey local user portion of the registry, which in turn changes the contents of the user.dat. All policy settings affecting user.dat are determined by a specific username or by the default user. The logon and network access settings that you define modify the HKey local machine portion of the registry, which in turn changes the contents of the system.dat. All policy settings affecting system.dat are determined by a specific computer name or by the default computer. In Windows 95, system policies are implemented through system policy files created and modified with the System Policy Editor, or POLEdit. Note, the POLEdit utility is not installed automatically during a default setup and must be installed through the Windows Setup tab of the Add Remove Programs icon of Control Panel. POLEdit can be found in the Admin App Tools POLEdit directory on the Windows 95 CD. An example will show all the settings for the specific users, specific computers, default computer, and default user are stored in a single file called the System Policy file. Policy files should be called config.pol unless you wish to make these manual updates, as we'll talk about later. When a user logs on, the system policies for that user and computer are copied to the local registry and replace the settings in the user.dat and system.dat files. So let's go ahead and open up PawlEdit. I'll go to the Start button and run PawlEdit, and we'll go ahead and create a new file. Network administrators can use the System Policy Editor to create and modify system policy files. With System Policy Editor, you can set the default computer and default user policy entries, or create entries for individual users and computers. By default, these include the policy entries you defined for the default user and default computer earlier. You can also create entries for groups. Now you need to specify whether you want policies automatically downloaded from a centralized server or whether you want to have policies downloaded from other specified locations. The System Policy Editor is a tool which has two modes that can be used for two main tasks. In policy file mode, you can create and modify system policy files for implementation on other computers. This is an indirect edit of the registry and only reflects change when users log on after the policy file is saved and copied to the appropriate network server locations. In registry mode, you can edit the registry of the local computer or even a remote computer. Now this is a direct edit of this local user.dat or system.dat, and changes are reflected immediately. Using the System Policy Editor in registry mode is merely a way of doing registry changes with a more friendly and structured user interface. It comes in real handy for testing a policy before sending it out on the network at large. Now when you initially run PawlEdit, it is not in any specific mode. When you create or open a policy file, you put PawlEdit in policy file mode. The title bar shows either untitled if you've not saved a new policy, or the policy file name if you're working on a current one. Now when you open Policy Editor in registry mode, you go to File, Open Registry, or you can even go File, Connect to a remote one. You put PawlEdit in registry mode. And notice the title bar now says Local Registry. Now normally when you use the System Policy Editor in registry mode, you make changes by marking and unmarking registry option. These changes are made immediately to the system.dat and user.dat files on the local or remote computer. A restart or log off log on procedure is not required. Now when using the System Policy Editor in policy file mode to work with system policy files, the process is slightly different. With the POL files, changes to the user's registry are not made until the next time the user logs on after the POL file is distributed to the appropriate network locations. The actual policies that appear in the PawlEdit user interface is determined by a template file. This template file controls which options are available, how they're organized, default values, checkboxes, text fields, radio buttons, and so forth. The template file is a text file which has a defined structure and syntax to create the user interface seen in PawlEdit. When you start System Policy Editor, Windows 95 opens the default policy template which the network administrator can enable or modify. By default, this template file is named admin.adm and is stored in the Windows INF directory. A network administrator can either modify admin.adm or create their own template file. As an example of the relationship between the template file and the interface in PawlEdit, here's a portion of the ADM. So I'll go to My Computer, Explorer, the C drive, go to my Windows directory, and the INF directory is hidden by default. So again, in my Explorer view, I've unhidden the directory. Go to INF, and you'll see admin.adm. We'll double click on it, and you can see it's just basically a text file with different sections and key values. And these are defined in the Windows 95 Resource Kit. So you could go in and create your own system policies and implement them on the network. And basically you just have to determine what registry keys you want to affect on the network. Creating your own template is helpful when you want to define a specific set of registry settings, including settings not included with the admin ADM file shipped with Windows 95. Exact details on the creation, features, and syntax and limitations of system policy templates is covered in the Windows 95 Resource Kit. The Windows 95 Resource Kit also ships with other sample ADM files for various levels of network and desktop security. You have three options when working in file policy mode. Go ahead and open up the default computer, and I'll look at the option, for instance, for access control. Now checked means that the policy is implemented and settings are added to the registry. Cleared means the policy is implemented and settings are removed from the registry. And gray means the registry key for the policy is not modified. The purpose of having 3 states for policies is for the creation of the policy file and logon speed. When the policy file is created, only the checked and cleared policy settings are actually saved to the policy file. When a user logs on, the settings in the policy file are copied into the local registry. The grayed options, which never made it into the policy file, do not have to be loaded across the network. Not only does this provide an easy way for administrators to pick the policies that are important to them, but it also allows Windows 95 to make the appropriate modifications to the registry very quickly. As more and more corporate administrators develop custom policy template files, or ADM files, with extensive policy listings, this prevents a Windows 95 workstation from having to download and examine every entry as user logs on. I'm going to specify an individual user policy right now. So I'm in Policy Editor, and I can just go to Add User, and I can actually go to Browse. We're going to look at the user account list on my security provider, and I can scroll through, and there's Grand Poobah, and I'll add it, and click OK. Now note there is no limit to the number of individual users or computers you can have in the policy file, although you reach a point where network servers become overloaded when servicing too many users. The network administrator can specify users pulling policies off of more than one server to better balance network resources. If the computer is configured with user-level security, you can manually enter the group name or press the Browse button to download the security provider's list of users and groups. If a user belongs to multiple groups, an order of priority within the group needs to be established so that the correct layers of system policies are applied. For example, in a Windows NT domain, a network administrator may want to establish policies for the domain users and the sales group department. However, the network administrator wants to apply the policies of the domain users group first, then apply the policies of the sales department. This way, a user gets the general settings first, then more specific settings of their group. To specify the group priority, you'll need to select Option Group Priority and arrange the groups. Highest priority groups are at the top of the list. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add some groups. Go to Add Group and Browse, and I'm picking up the account and group list off the security provider, which is Midway. Got Sales Department. I'll add that one. Click OK, and there's Sales Department. I'll also add the domain users. Browse. Domain users. And add. Now I've got 2 groups. You can tell they're groups, the head's a little bit different than the single users. I go to Options, Group Priority, and I could adjust which group takes priority. And so in the example I was talking about earlier, this would be the correct way. The domain users would first get the settings that were chosen for them, and then if you also were part of the sales department, you'd get those settings added to your system policies. Windows 95 processes policies according to this algorithm. The user logs on. Now, if a user policy exists for that username, if yes, then it goes ahead and adds that policy. Then it checks to see if there's a policy for that specific computer name. And if yes, applies the computer name policy. Now, if a user logs in and there is no specific user policy, then we'll apply the default user policies. And then after that, we'll check and see, is the user a member of any group in the pol file? If no, then we go ahead and then add the default computer policies or a specific computer policy. And if yes, we'll add the policies from the policy file for groups in the priority order given. This is very similar to the user-level security, in which if a user is explicitly specified in the policy file, that is the policy they get. If they're specified in a group, that doesn't really matter if they're also specified explicitly in the pol file. Now I'm going to go ahead and put Lex into 2 different groups, and we'll see this in action. Okay, I'll start adding some groups in. Browse. I'm going to add a group that Lex is part of. And Lex is also part of the domain users group. Now I'm going to go in desktop settings, I'm going to specify a specific wallpaper for the squadron work group. I want to make sure that I use bubbles. And for domain users, go into desktop and wallpaper. And I'm going to select triangles. Okay. I'm going to options and group priority. And we're going to first implement the Squadron 1 wallpaper. And then you can see the domain user's wallpaper is actually going to override Squadron 1. And I don't want to trivialize user profiles here either. I'm just using wallpaper as an example. It's as easy to see. So now, in the final step, I do need to save the file out. So I'm going to go up to my NT server, Yorktown. And I need to go to the netlogon directory, which is under the System32 replication import scripts. I'm going to call the file config.pol and save it there. And you notice in the title bar now it shows the location for the policy file. So now I'm going to have Lex help me show how group policies work. So Lex, go ahead and log in.
Okay.
And Lex logged in, and he got the triangle bitmap, because go ahead and look again under Options, Group Priority. We've got the domain users ahead of Squadron 1. And remember, Squadron 1 had the bubbles bitmap, and domain users had triangles. So when Lex logged on, he first got the bubbles bitmap, but then domain users gave him the triangle bitmap. Let's go ahead and log out, Lex.
All right. Shut down. And all set.
Okay, and I'm going to change the priority of the groups now and move Squadron 1 up to the top. So now bubbles should be the bitmap that Lex will see when he logs in. I need to save the policy file again. Now go ahead, Lex. Go ahead and log in again.
Okay. And what do you know? Bubbles.
There we go. All right, go ahead and log out one more time there, Lex.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a user-specific policy. Alrighty. So to add a user-specific policy, I go to Add User, and Browse. And I get the list of users and accounts on my security provider, which is Midway. Go ahead and find Lex here. Click on Add. Now Lex shows up. And keep in mind again, Lex's user profile that I'm going to be setting up here is going to override the group profiles that we set earlier for Squadron 1 or domain users. So now I'm going to go into Lex and look at his desktop and wallpaper. And I go down here to wallpaper name. And I'm going to select a wallpaper I think Lex is going to like. And also to help Lex out, I'm going to go into System and adjust some of the restrictions he has for Windows programs. So go ahead and add here a program that he's going to be able to run. And this will be the only program he's going to be able to run. Now I'm going to save this. And Lex, why don't you log in one last time here?
Okay, sure, Mike. We'll just hit close here. And hey, look, it's that bitmap I wanted.
Yeah, you're welcome, Lex.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Pretty neat.
Note that Network Administrator can create a system policy with any name and specify exactly which user is to use it. But config.pol is placed in the proper net location and is used automatically by everyone. You should also note the automatic policy file must be named config.pol. If you change this file name, Windows 95 does not automatically use it. To create an automatic policy file, merely use the System Policy Editor and create a policy file with the file name config.pol, just like user profiles. Windows 95 decides which type of network server to check for system policies based on the primary network logon in Control Panel Network. If Windows 95 is configured for the client for network networks as the primary network logon, the preferred network server is checked. If Windows 95 is configured with the client for Windows networks as the primary network logon, the Windows NT domain is checked.
Hey, Mike. How come I can't run pinball anymore?
Sorry, Lex.
Oh, man.
To set up for an automatic downloading on Windows NT networks, the Windows 95 workstation must be configured with the client for Windows networks as the primary network logon. The Windows 95 workstation must be configured to log on to the Windows NT domain. And you create the policy file, config.pol, and copy it to the location where the primary domain controller is determined by the specific domain, primary domain controller /netlogin, and then the config.pol. The netlogon share is a default share of a Windows NT domain controller and corresponds to the WinNT System32 REPL import scripts directory on the Windows 95 server. Upon logon, Windows 95 automatically looks in this location for config.pol. If found, it reads the file and looks for a specific user corresponding to the user logon name and a specific computer name corresponding to the computer name. If found, it reads the policies for the specific user and specific computer and makes the changes to the local user.dat and system.dat. If the specific user or specific computer are not found, the policies for the default user and default computer are read instead. Windows 95 automatically downloads system policy files from the netlogon share of the primary domain controller of the Windows NT domain being logged into. On large networks, when thousands of users log in and access the same policy file in a short period of time, there is potential for a loss of network performance. To avoid a slowdown on the network, Windows 95 offers load balancing on Windows NT networks. With load balancing turned on, system policies are taken from the login server rather than the primary domain controller. To maintain the availability of the config.pol file on all the Windows NT servers acting as domain controllers, the Windows NT primary domain controller must be configured to replicate the contents of its netlogon share to the other Windows NT servers acting as domain controllers. With replication enabled, the contents of the primary domain controller's netlogon share is copied to the netlogon shares of all the other Windows NT servers acting as backup domain controllers. The replication of the netlogon share is enabled by default on Windows NT domain servers. To enable load balancing from the System Policy Editor, choose the default computer and then check the Remote Update Policy and check the Load Balance box. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I'm going to go to Default Computer. We go to Update. We scroll through there, there's a checkbox for Load Balance. And with this checked in here, now I can place this config.pol on any of my NT domains and they'll be replicated throughout the domain structure. I need to put automatic in. To set up for automatic downloading on NetWare networks, the Windows 95 workstation must be configured with the client for NetWare networks as the primary logon. The Windows 95 workstation must be configured to log on to a NetWare preferred server. You create an automatic policy file, config.pol, and copy to the location preferred server sys public config.pol. Upon logon, Windows 95 automatically looks in this location for config.pol. If found, it reads the file and looks for a specific user corresponding to the user logon name and a specific computer corresponding to the computer name, the same as the Windows NT example. As an alternative to using an automatic download location, a network administrator can specify on a per-machine basis exactly where on the network to look for the system policy file and the system policy file name. Manually specifying a system policy file to download overrides automatic downloading and gives network administrators the flexibility to determine where a user's policies are stored. Manual update has the following benefits. One is we can do load balancing for NetWare networks. Manual update allows a network administrator to specify a different NetWare server in which to obtain the system policies file, take the load off the preferred server. It is assumed that the user in this case is able to attach during the logon process to the NetWare server where their policy file is stored. Instituting policies for physical locations by having different groups of computers using different policy files can also be done by using the manual policy update method. You should note the word manual in manual update refers to specifying manually where to get the policy file, not specifying manually when to update the local registry with the system policy settings. The update still happens upon logon, only it does not look in the particular network's default location. So now I'm going to go ahead and set this up for a manual update. So I go into Default Computer, and again I go to Network, I go to Update. We've got Remote Update. I scroll through there and I pull this down and I can say Manual. And for example, if I had only Windows 95 machines in my network, I could specify Lex's machine, for instance, to be the policy location. And now, on this particular machine, when I use the policies, it'll only look on Lex's machine for policies and not automatically on the NT machine. Things you should keep in mind when dealing with user profiles and system policies. Now, user profiles on the local computer consist of a directory structure containing the user profile under Windows Profiles. User profiles on the network consist of the user profiles stored in the user-specific directory on the network server. For Windows NT domains, it is the user's home directory. For Novell NetWare, it is the sysmail user ID directory. The automatic system policy file is again called config.pol, and it is automatically looked for when the user logs on to the network. Automatic download of config.pol is done from the primary domain controller netlogon in a Windows NT domain, or from the syspublic directory on the preferred network server. The network location for user profiles and system policies are based on the primary network logon. Verify that all users are using the same primary network logon in a mixed client environment. You will also want to thoroughly test any system policy you plan to use on your network. An incorrectly configured system policy can affect hundreds of machines at a time. Test your policy in registry mode first on a few machines, or even set up test groups for policy distributions. I also usually include a specific user profile for administrators with no restrictions set. This can be a good safety catch if you goof up policies or disable too many features on your desktops. You can at least log on as the admin still and use regedit or polledit to fix the systems. In this segment, we have looked at the details of Windows 95 user profiles and system policies. We showed how user profiles allow people to have their desktop configuration follow them. We also showed how you can use system policies to disable features you might not want users to be exposed to on your network, such as pinball. In the next segment, Advanced Migration Issues, we will discuss SMS 1.1 and how it works with Windows 95, and server-based setups with floppy and Ripple-booted machines.
Thanks, Mike and Lex. I personally know of a lot of companies, both big and small, that must deal with more than one user per computer. User profiles solve many of the problems that you may have experienced in the past. Well, Mike is now coming back to join me and Frank for some more of your questions. Our Windows 95 engineers will continue to take calls throughout the show. Before we get started, you got it, we're going to talk about that contest one more time. I want you to name the feature of Microsoft Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. Just call and answer the question. There just may be a free Microsoft Encarta CD in it for you. Everyone that calls will get a shot at that Dell computer drawing on our last show. 1-800-254-4069 is the number to call when you know the answer. Okay, time now to field your questions again. You know, as I've been watching this, I know that the IS professionals that are our audience here are excited about the extent to which you're actually going to be able to manage use using both policies and profiles. So let me put you on the spot as a product manager here. Joel in Dayton, Ohio wanted to know, and I guess I and the viewers are interested, is from your point of view, Frank, which is more powerful, systems policies or user profiles?
Well, I think they can be pretty confusing, and obviously there's a question that's been generated from it, but there's a real simple way I like thinking about it. And first of all, the answer is system policies. I mean, your system policy file is all the information is contained in a file called config.pol, and that will override the registry settings for user.dat and system.dat. But the way I like thinking about it is kind of back to that old game we used to play as kids, which was rocks and scissors. This is a simplified version of the game where you actually only have rock and scissors and there's no paper. So your system administrator has this rock, okay, and that's at config.pol, and then the end user in the corporation has the user profile at user.dat, which is the scissors. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious which one's more powerful. Rock always beats scissors.
and ROC is their way in many ways to protect the enterprise computing, and whereas what's happening more for the user is more to protect their own sense of how they want their desktop to be.
Very much so, yeah.
Great. Well, Steve Rosenblum from Boston, Massachusetts, who also works in the help desk, wanted to know, do user profiles include INI files?
That's a good question. No, they don't. It's everything in HKey current user. So for Win32 applications, that works really well, and for Win16 applications, they still use INI files or their own private settings. So those wouldn't be part of a user profile.
Mm-hmm. I see. A question for you, Frank, from William in Omaha, and William wants to know: do user profiles need to be continually managed by the system administrator?
No. I mean, once they've been enabled by the system administrator, all of the administration sort of functions will be carried out by Windows 95. And the best way to explain this, I think, is to go through again, a case sort of scenario. So if I'm an end user and I'm logging onto my computer, my Windows 95 computer for the first time, it's going to go up to the server and it's going to get the file and it's going the user.dat file is going to download it to my system, and that'll take a little bit of time the very first time you log on to your computer. But then it will store that locally on your machine. And in the future, what will happen is that when you log off, the system will essentially copy the files in the way you've changed your registry and bring it back up to the server. So when you log back on, what happens is there's a comparison that goes on. Your machine will actually go up to the server, it'll query the server, and it'll say, hey, which is the more recent version of this particular file for this end user, and then that particular file will be used. So that's the way you're able to walk around the network and essentially get the same settings.
So the hierarchy of how that happens. Just to remind our users, because a lot of this is real rich and good content, where is all of this spec'd out? Okay, so if I'm at home and I'm watching this, where can I find the information that's contained in here?
Well, I mean, this is all again in the resource kit. I mean, that's the Bible, and I've said it 3 times today, and I don't think I can say it anymore, but if you don't have it, you should be getting it.
Great. Well, we decided while you were doing that last segment that a demo was a neat thing too. So let me basically give you the question that we thought would probably prompt a good demo for you, Mike. We got a call from Sharon up in Toronto, and Sharon wanted to know, how can she see what policies are in effect on a remote machine?
Okay. Yeah, there's not really a log file for it, so the best way is going to be in Policy Editor. I can look at a machine remotely, like I did with Regedit. So I can actually show that if you want. Okay.
Head over there.
Alrighty. So I'm going to go ahead and run Policy Editor, Pol Edit, bring up the UI, and we're not in any mode right now. So I go to File and Connect, and I'm going to connect remotely to the Lexington machine, Lex's machine, using basically the remote registry tools. I'm going to click OK. It's going to take a few seconds because it needs to verify that I do have access to Lex's machine, make sure I'm OK to do this. Another tip too you might want to do if you're on a brand new network and you're not sure if user profile or system policies are in effect, you can look for a config.pol file on your network and see if one's floating around there. That's usually a good idea when you get to a new network you're not familiar with. So we're going to connect here and see on the title bar it says Registry on Lexington. So now I'm looking at the registry on Lex's computer through Policy Editor, and we'll go to Local User, and I'll go to System, and I'll go to Restrictions. And for instance, on Lex's machine, I said he can only run Notepad. So I basically said only run allowed Windows applications. So he might call up and say, gee, how come I can't run Pinball, or how come I can't run WinWord, or something like that. And I could look on his machine remotely and say, oh, you have a policy in effect that says you can only run Notepad. So that's how that works.
Great. One of the things that that occurs to me also is that in the next couple of weeks, as people ramp to launch, it's a real good time for folks to think about getting a kind of training that they need to do that. And I want to remind folks there is the whole Microsoft authorized training education centers are available, and I know there are going to be a lot of special courses available, particularly right around launch time, to get people up and running on this, to have some sense of that. We just have time really for one last question here, and do I set location home directories for user on the NT server or network drives when setting up to do the user profiles?
Right. The issue is that when you create a user account in NT, when you create a home directory, you have 2 choices. One is to create a local directory, or one is to create like a network drive. And it's very important to make sure you create a network drive. If you create a local drive for your home directory, it's only on the NT server itself, and that won't work. You need to create a network drive. And
who actually will be the people who are setting these? Are they going to be Microsoft Systems certified engineers? Are they Workgroup administrators?
Any type of administrator on the NT system. Somebody has account access to create new users. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, that's all the time we have in this question and answer period, but we have one more coming up at the end of this segment. Mike, don't get too comfortable. It's time for you to head back to your Traincast workstation, and we'll get on with the show. Just a reminder that our Traincast question and answer phone lines will remain open until the end of this program. Just call that number, 206-635-7066, and maybe we'll use your question in our final question and answer session. Well, I assume he's in place, so Mike, take it away.
In the previous segment, we looked at user profiles and system policies. We saw how to implement both on Windows NT and Novell NetWare. In this next segment, we'll discuss issues with SMS 1.1, server-based setup, floppy, and ripple boot scenarios with Windows 95. I've called this segment Advanced Migration not because you have to be a gearhead like Lex or myself to do these larger migrations. In general, it does involve more steps though in testing, which for a large installation is still a time saver. In a network environment, workstations can be set up to install and run Windows 95 from a file server. This can result in making a Windows 95 installation on several workstations easier and quicker to accomplish. Typically, running a shared installation of Windows 95 provides network administrators with a centralized location for managing Windows. When installing Windows 95 in a file server environment, network administrators are often concerned with centralized management, simplifying Windows 95 installation on multiple computers, preserving the security of the file server, and reducing the impact on hardware resources. Windows 95 addresses each of these issues. By installing to run Windows 95 off of a file server instead of running it locally on each workstation, the impact on total disk space across the network is reduced to approximately 2 megabytes per computer. The administrator can also pass or protect the file server share for the Windows 95 installation. Setup scripts with custom computer names, machine directories, and other options can automatically be created using a new utility, NetSetupExe. Implementing a network installation of Windows 95 involves 4 basic steps: installing the Windows 95 directories and files onto the network server, creating setup scripts, creating machine directories for each of the workstations necessary for floppy and Ripple boot workstations, and running setup for each client workstation. The boot up and operation of Windows 95 will differ among the various client workstation types. The supported client workstation boot up options are: you can boot from the hard disk, you can boot from a floppy disk, and you can also do a remote initial program load or boot from a Ripple card. Windows 95 provides support for the following installation scenarios. You can save space on the local workstations, but network traffic has increased as Windows is run over the network. You can create very secure workstations without hard drives or even floppy drives with Ripple boot, and all of the Windows 95 is located on the network. The administrative installation in Windows version 3.x, setup/A, simply expanded every file from the installation diskettes, renamed them, copied them to a specific directory, and made them read-only. The administrative installation in Windows 95 offers new improvements. These include a new user interface to create machine directories for users by computers and custom setup scripts. Windows 95 uses a separate executable file for administering installations. Instead of using the familiar Windows version 3x setup/A command, administrators will run the Windows 95 NetSetup. NetSetupExe does not ship with the floppy diskette packages and only on the CD package. NetSetupExe must also be run from a Windows 95 workstation. Windows version 3.x users previously ran setup/A to install Windows onto the file server, and then setup/N for the workstation to install Windows from the file server. Setup/A is replaced by NetSetup, and setup/N is replaced by just running Windows 95 setup without any switches from a NetSetup installation. The Windows 95 setup utility for file server installations, NetSetupExe, makes it easier for network administrators to prepare the file server for Windows 95. After NetSetup performs an administrative setup onto the file server, the Windows 95 directory must be made available to the workstations who want to install over the network. Workstations need to run setup.exe from the shared Windows 95 directory, thereby completing the installation process. NetSetup provides a user interface to perform the following tasks: server installation, installing the Windows 95 files onto a file server, create setup scripts, the MS-batch INF, or create machine directories, and determine workstation installation options. So I'll go ahead and start up the NetSetupExe here. Go into the admin directory on the CD, go into NetTools, NetSetup, and there we go. The first time NetSetup is run, the server path must be set. To change the server path location, choose the Set Path button and type in the new location. The server path must be a valid UNC path to a network location. The destination path should point to the directory either on the file server or local directory. Once the server path is determined and the installation button is chosen, the program searches for netsetup.pol in the root directory of the file server path to determine whether or not an administrative installation has already been performed. netsetup.pol is a registry file containing a list of computers and machine directories. This file is created by netsetup.exe during a server installation and later expanded when machine directories and setup batch files are created. If this file is not found, Windows 95 assumes that an administrative installation has not been performed. If netsetup.pol is found, Windows 95 notifies the user that Windows 95 has already been installed and asks whether the installation should be overwritten. You should note an administrative network setup should not be used to overwrite an existing directory with an administrative install of Windows version 3.x. Instead, a new directory should be selected. After obtaining information from the administrator, netsetup continues installing Windows 95 on the server in the following steps. Windows 95 files are copied into the shared Windows 95 directory on the file server. A layout INF file is created and placed in the INF directory. This file is used by setup to locate files in the new directory tree. A default setup script, msbatch.inf, is generated by netsetup.pol for use by Windows 95 setup when there is none specified. And the file server directory structure will be created in the following format. I want to go ahead and look at it here on the network server. I'm going to exit out of netsetup. I already have an installation created here. Go back a directory. There's Windows 95. And I'll use the Explorer view so I can see this easier. Takes a couple seconds for it. And you'll notice after I ran net setup, I did this earlier, I have different new directories here, whereas in Windows 3.1 this would just be one big subdirectory. Now I have separate subdirectories for each item. Windows 95 setup is controlled by a default setup script, msbatch.inf, if no other setup script is specified. This setup script can be customized by modifying the msbatch.inf file. A default setup script is created during the initial installation. The administrator can create another setup script to overwrite the default by choosing Make Script from the server-based setup dialog box. The Make Script button is a utility that can be used at any time for creating scripts. Creating a default setup script is an optional step that provides network administrators further control over the Windows 95 installation. After selecting the Make Script button, the policy editor, or POL-edit, is launched. A default setup script based on options specified in Policy Editor is created on the root of the shared Windows 95 directory. The network administrator can choose to customize a wide variety of options. Note the System Policy user interface is not setting system policies, but merely a user interface for making a custom setup script. After entering the setup path and optionally creating a default setup script, machine directories and custom setup scripts can be created for each user by choosing Add from the Machine Directory Setup section of the server-based setup dialog box, as talked about previously. These directories contain per-computer files and are located on the server. The files are necessary for floppy and Ripple-booted computers and are optional for hard disk-booted computers. The files include the registry, that's the system.dat and user.dat, ini files such as system.ini and win.ini, and the desktop, spool, start menu, and swap file directories. So I'll go ahead and open up Net Setup again, and we'll look at the machine directory option. So again, you go into the admin directory on the CD, Net Tools, Net Setup, Netsetup.exe. I'll point to the path that I used earlier to set this up. Alrighty. Now click on Add, and now I can set up machine directories. From this screen, computers can be added one at a time or in groups. To add one computer, choose Setup, One Computer, and enter the computer name and the machine directory on the server. Net Setup creates a directory if it does not already exist and places a custom setup script in the directory containing the computer name, as well as the locations of the shared directory and the machine directory if Generate Setup Script is checked. The custom script contains selections from the default script on the server, though these can be changed for a particular computer by choosing Edit Script. To add several computers at once, create a simple text file containing computer names and their machine directories. You choose Setup Multiple Computers, then choose Generate Setup Scripts, type the name and location of the text file in the dialog box, and choose OK. Directories are created and custom setup scripts will be placed in each directory. This is described in more detail in Chapter 5 of the Windows 95 Resource Kit. When install is run from the server-based setup dialog box, the administrator can control which installation options are available to the user. These options determine which files remain on the file server and which files are copied to the local workstation. NetSetupExe writes this setting to the default setup script msbatch-inf. The administrator can determine where the shared files listed in the Windows directory and file structure section are located. They could be on the file server. The shared Windows files can reside on the server location specified in the batch script. They can be located on the hard drive. The shared Windows files reside on the user's local hard drive. Or they can be the user's choice. The shared Windows files may reside on either the server or the user's local drive, and allow the user to make that decision, as I've done earlier for this demo. The Windows 95 workstation can be installed in several different ways depending on the policies selected during administrative installation and the hardware on the workstation. The following is a list of the different ways a workstation can boot into Windows 95. You can boot from a local hard disk. Windows 95 can be installed as a standalone workstation with all the files necessary to run Windows 95 on the local hard disk. Windows 95 can be installed as a shared installation with Windows 95 running from the shared directory on the network server, or from a floppy drive. Only the files needed to make a real mode connection to the file server are stored on the floppy drive, and all their files are stored on the file server. Or from a Ripple server, only the files needed to make a real mode connection to the file server are stored on a RAM drive. All other files are stored on the file server. In the case of the standalone installation, all the files necessary to run Windows 95 are copied to the workstation. When the user invokes SetupExe from the shared Windows 95 directory on the file server, it checks the default setup script msbatch-inf to see if server-based setups are allowed. The script can force a standalone installation, a server-based installation, or allow either installation to be selected. For a standalone installation, setup asks for the name of a local directory to install to and process from there. The process at this point is the same as discussed in the Traincast Windows 95 setup session by Johnny Lindsay. In the case of the shared network installation, SetupExe prompts the user for a directory to copy the user-specific and computer-specific files to. The user directory can be stored locally or on the file server. Windows 95 assigns files a separate logical directory ID, or LID. LIDs point to different drives depending on the installation and hardware limitations. The table below summarizes where to find these logical directories depending upon the workstation's boot option. For a standalone installation, all LIDs point to the local hard disk. You can look at the setup log txt file for information on the LIDs used for an installation. The Windows 95 SDK has information for developers that would need to know which LID a component they built gets put in. So let's look at a setup log txt, and I'll for instance point out a few of the LIDs. So I go to Start, Run, and my setup log is in the root directory. And this will be different depending upon the type of installation you do. Scroll through. You notice down here there's a section that says Destination, and there's a bunch of numbers next to each one of these directories. These numbers are the LID numbers. And for instance, LID number 11 points to the Windows System directory. Now for instance, if I did a floppy installation, number 11 would point up to the file server, since all the main components of Windows 95 would be on the file server. So the directories you need to manage are the shared Windows 95 files, the user profiles directories, machine directories, and user data or home data directories. Workstations running a shared copy of Windows 95 always boots with a real mode network. This provides a small and efficient method for accessing the file server. Windows 95 transitions from the real mode stack to the protected mode stack for clients that ship in Windows 95, and remove the real mode stack from memory if possible. In a shared network installation of Windows 95, with the workstations running Windows 95 from the server, the workstation first boots with the real mode stack and then transitions into the protected mode stack, only if possible. Otherwise, only real mode network support is available. In order to transition into the protected mode stack, the following is necessary. The protected mode stack must include both a protected mode redirector and a protected mode protocol. Both the real mode redirector and the protected mode redirector must process the same file sharing protocol. For example, they both either must be SMB or NCPs. You can't mix and match those. Both the real mode and protected mode stacks must run the same communications protocol. For example, they both need to be running NetBEUI or IPX SPX. You should note, currently this transition is limited to IPX and NetBEUI stacks with both SMB and NCP readers. Windows 95 does not include a real mode TCP/IP stack and therefore cannot transition to the protected mode TCP/IP stack. When doing a server-based setup using floppy or Ripple boot, you will need to be using IPX or NetBEUI on your network. The following third-party network clients can run Windows 95 from a file server. These clients currently cannot transition into a protected mode network and consequently do not have support for the file services, file and print sharing, unless provided by the real mode components. Artisoft Lantastic 5.x and above, Banyan Vines 5.52, Death Packworks version 4.x, IBM OS2 LAN Server 1.2 or higher, and Novell NetWare Workstation Shell versions 3x and 4x the real mode, and SunSelect PCNFS 5.0. Windows 95 performs the following steps when setting up a shared network copy of Windows 95 on a workstation booting from a local hard disk. Obtains paths to the user's directory and computer directory from either the setup script or by prompting the user. Detects and configures the hardware and stores the information in the registry setting on the computer directory. Allows changes to any settings not specified in the setup script using the normal setup dialog boxes, and sets the logical directory identification, or LIDs, in the registry. We also then configure the network for transitioning to enhanced mode and transfer the system files to the boot disk, changing the boot sector, and copies the files to the boot disk. Copies files also to the machine directory if files are not already present, and generate an autoexec-bat and config sys. The Windows 95 defaults are used for the config sys, so no other changes are needed. With the autoexec-bat, setup adds the following entries. We'll add a ComSpec variable, we'll add snapshot.exe, a netstart command, a netlogon command, and a netuse command to the share you installed from. Snapshot.exe takes a snapshot of the interrupt table, device chains, and other real mode system information before starting the network. After protected mode Windows is executed, snapshot.vxd, whose entry is written in the registry, inherits the information from snapshot.exe and initiates the transition of the real mode network to the protected mode network. The real mode network is stopped and the protected mode network components load. Snapshot hands off the connections to the protected mode network. Memory from the real mode network components are released. The boot process into Windows 95 continues. It's assumed for this information here that the hard disk installation is pointing to the local drive. If the machine directory was stored on a network drive, a mini registry would need to be created. The logical directory locations for boot dir, windir, and shared dir are stored on the setup key of the registry. Running a shared copy of Windows 95 on a floppy booted workstation differs from running it on a hard drive booted computer. The booted files on the workstation must be able to load the network components to access the Windows directory and the workstation's machine directory on the network within the file space available on the floppy drive. So we're going to see an example here with Lex using Windows 3.1 and VLM to upgrade to a Windows 95 machine booting from a floppy disk.
Hi, Lex.
Want to go ahead and start setup?
Yeah, sure. The first thing I need to do is go ahead and boot the machine off of a floppy diskette. The diskette's going to contain a real mode network client and get me connected to the NetWare server. So the first thing I have to do here is go ahead and log into the server. So I'll enter my login name and my password. And this will go ahead and map my NetWare drives, and I've got a batch file that automatically starts Windows 3.1. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and open up File Manager here and connect to the server. And in the NetWare server, we actually have a Win95 directory that I can go to. Okay, I need to find setup here. There it is. And I'll go ahead and start the setup process. The first thing that Windows 95 is going to do is perform a routine check on my system. Basically, it goes out and just makes sure that my hard drive's okay and makes sure that I have the proper equipment. We can go ahead and continue here. It's just warning me to periodically run ScanDisk just to make sure that my hard drive stays in good shape. And it's currently preparing my system for Windows 95, so it can go ahead and complete the setup process.
So Lex is now going to go ahead and answer the questions for phase 1 of setup.
Right. The first thing that setup needs to do is just go out and collect information about my system. So if I select Next here, I can actually select the type of setup that I want to occur. I can either copy all Windows files to my local computer, or I can set up Windows to run from a network server, which is actually what I want to do.
Now this is actually accomplished with the MS-batch-inf file. We put a setting in there for that, so this isn't a normal screen that comes up.
If I go ahead and select Next here, it'll also give me an option to select the startup method. I can either start Windows from my hard disk. No, don't really want to do that. I can start Windows from the network. That would be possible if I had a net card that allowed me to do that. Or I can start Windows from a floppy disk, which is the choice that I want to make. If I go ahead and select Next here, it'll ask me for a machine directory. And I'll type in the directory that I have mapped, or the drive letter that I have mapped to my user directory on the network server.
And now this looks a lot like regular setup, just copying different components, checking the setup, a normal setup at this point.
Absolutely. Okay, now I have to select a setup option. I can select Typical, Portable, Compact, or Custom. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and select Typical. I can enter my username and company name here, which is already entered. And then it'll go out and detect hardware, the type of hardware that I have in my machine.
So even though we're going to boot the machine off a floppy drive, we still have to do the normal hardware detection, just like a regular setup.
Right. The important thing to remember here is that even though the files aren't stored on this machine, Windows 95 will be running from this machine. So it needs to know what type of hardware that I have actually physically installed in this computer. And I think I'll just tell Windows to install the most common components, which is actually the recommended way to do this. We'll go ahead and select Next here. And Windows 95 will ask me for my computer name, my work group, and a computer description. I'm going to go ahead and take the defaults and select Next. And it's ready to start copying files. If I select Next here, it'll go ahead and prepare the directories that it needs to prepare to copy the files, and then actually start the file copying process.
Now this should happen quite a bit quicker than a normal installation, because we're only copying about 2 megabytes worth of files to your machine directory.
Right.
So we don't need to copy all the files down to the server.
During the file copying process, you'll get several banner pages that just give you more information about Windows 95. Pretty informative, actually. Okay, looks like we're done copying files, and Windows 95 is asking me for a floppy diskette. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the diskette into drive A. And at this point, Windows 95 will go ahead and prepare the floppy with all of the files and settings that I need to actually go out and connect to the NetWare server when I boot up. Okay, Windows 95 has actually finished copying the files and preparing my floppy diskette. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and finish the setup process. All I need to do is simply click the Finish button, and Windows 95 will go ahead and prepare my machine for a reboot.
At this point, we won't be loading VLM anymore, correct?
Right. At this point, we will be loading our files, our real mode redirector, to connect to the NetWare server. Windows 95 is starting up. And I need to go ahead and log on to the NetWare server again. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my username and my password. Something went wrong.
I don't know, Lex, what do you think's wrong with it? How are we going to fix that?
We'll probably have to edit the autoexec bat, config sys, and hundreds of INI files, Mike.
That's a good guess, Lex. But actually, I think from the error message there, it seems we have an entry in the machines.ini file that's misplaced. So let's go up on my machine. I'm going to look on the NetWare server. And in the Windows 95 directory, there's a machines.ini file. Let's find it here. Okay. What this file does, let me maximize this window, easier to read. This file specifies the node address for Lex's net card in his machine and the location on the network where his full registry is located at. You need to keep in mind that in Windows 95, the complete registry cannot fit on the whole floppy disk. So we have a mini registry on Lex's floppy, and then this information in the machine's INI points to the rest of the registry on the network. So apparently we have this number incorrect here for his node ID. So I'm going to find out what Lex is actually logged in as. Okay. Let's go to the public directory on the NetWare server. Actually, I'll need to run a command line here. Let's see. User list. I'll go to start run, and I'll drag user list into the start run line. I'm going to put a /a on the end. And as you can see here on the screen, Lex's node address is 20AF706D96. That seems to match up. Well, actually, what's going wrong here is there's two preceding zeros that don't show up in this user interface. So I need to go into the machine's INI file and put 2 zeros in. Zeros. Save the file. Okay, and Lex, go ahead and reboot now, and it should work.
Okay, Mike. Sure.
So there's only one INI file.
Just one INI file. Much better. Okay, Windows 95 is currently starting again. And in just a second, it should be prompting me to log in with my username and password. But let's talk about what's going on behind the scenes here just for a second. Normally, when you attach to a NetWare server in real mode, you use a real mode protocol like IPX, which is usually supplied by another company, NetWare, and you use NetWare's client. Windows 95 has a real mode version of IPX that we ship, and also a real mode client that allows us to talk to NetWare servers. And that's currently what's going on right now behind the scenes. Okay, it looks like it's time for me to go ahead and log into the server. So the first thing I need to do is enter my username and then my password. And Windows 95 should go ahead and start from the server this time.
It looks like your system administrator fixed it properly, Lex.
Why, yes, it does look like my system administrator fixed it properly. I'm going to have to thank him when I see him.
Now we're going to go through the normal setup phases here, just like you would for a local install. The only difference is the files are being copied up to the server.
Absolutely. Okay, the first thing I have to do is go ahead and log in. And specify my network server.
There was the network login script.
Yep. And now Windows 95 is going to go out and look for my plug-and-play hardware devices. So any plug-and-play compliant devices that I have installed in the machine will be detected and enabled. This is the portion of setup where it actually goes out and sets up the icons for my control panel. I'm currently creating the start menu. And in just a second, we'll set up help, MS-DOS program settings, and the time zone.
So this is really the same as the regular setup we would have done.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely the same. I'm going to go ahead and select my time zone. Pacific time. And Windows 95 has just finished configuring my system. All I have to do here is click OK, and my computer will go ahead and restart, and we should be set up.
So that last boot was required due to the plug-and-play technology?
Absolutely, Mike. Once we go out and enumerate is actually the proper term, all of our plug-and-play devices, we have to go ahead and reboot the machine so that we can assign their configurations and get those devices enabled. Okay. Okay, I just had to enter my username and password again because we're rebooting. And we're going through the process of connecting up to the server and actually starting Windows 95.
Now, if you notice there's a command that went by called setmdir. And that command is used by Windows 95 to find the registry, which we did with the machine's INI file.
Ah. Okay, there went my network login script. And shortly all my icons in my taskbar should appear. There we go. All rebooted and ready to go.
Thanks, Lex, for helping me out there. I really appreciate it.
Oh, sure, Mike, anytime.
Okay, thanks. So now I'm going to go ahead and look on the network server at Lex's machine directory and see what actually is in that location. So I'm up on the network server. I go to Users, and LexT. We can see it's a pretty minimal configuration. It has the INI files, registry.dat, Lex's swap file, things like that, which would pretty much be machine specific. On Lex's diskette, when he boots up, we have a config.sys and autoexec.bat file. In the config.sys, the Windows 95 defaults are used and no other changes are made. In the autoexec.bat, setup adds the following entries. It adds a snapshot, it adds a net start, it adds a net logon command, it adds a net use command to the Windows 95 directory, it also adds a path to the Windows 95 directory, and at the bottom it adds a setmdir command which points to the machine's INI file. Setmdir is used to find where the complete registry is for the remainder of the boot sequence. The transition into the protected mode network begins when snapshot VXT loads. The real mode network is stopped and the protected mode network components load. Snapshot hands off the connections to the protected mode network. Memory from the real mode network components are released. The boot process then continues into Windows 95. iOS and NetX store their parameters in the registry, and consequently, a copy of the system.dat must exist on the floppy boot disk. Since a full-size system.dat cannot fit onto the floppy or Ripple image, setup creates a mini version of system.dat for the floppy boot disk. The user is prompted for the path to the machine directory unless it is specified in the setup script. Since most of the Windows 95 files are located on the server, the file copy phase would only take about 2 megabytes of files. Windows 95 can be installed on Ripple workstations booting from NetWare 3X and 4X Ripple servers. Ripple workstations contain a card with a remote boot prom which queries the network for instructions. The Ripple boot sequence requires the workstation to create a RAM drive and copy a disk image from the file server to the drive before it can continue to boot. Running setup on a Ripple workstation is similar to setting up Windows 95 on a floppy booted computer. A mini registry is created and copied to the boot disk. On a Ripple workstation, the boot disk is a RAM drive. Windows 95 supports the following Ripple network adapters: a 3COM eLink 2, 3COM eLink 3, Intel ePro, SNMC, IBM Token Ring, and some various Cabletron cards. In the config sys, setup would add the following entry. It would put in a RAM drive, point to the A drive, which is actually the Ripple drive. And also would put a size parameter on the end of the RAM drive to adjust it to probably about 1.4 megabytes in size. Because Ripple computers can have local drives, the RAM drive statement may vary from computer to computer. Setup adds the first available drive letter to the RAM drive. Setup adds to the autoexec bat the following entries. It adds a set command with ComSpec pointing to the RAM drive. It also has a copy statement to copy some of the items from the RAM drive. It has snapshot, net start, net logon. It also has a net use pointing to the Windows 95 shared installation. And it also again puts in a path statement pointing to the Windows 95 shared installation. And set MDR is at the very end, just like we had for floppy boot, pointing to the machine INI file. After Windows is launched, Snapshot VXD inherits the information from Snapshot XE and initiates the transition from the real mode network to the protected mode network. Any real mode memory previously used for the network is released, as well as the memory used for the RAM drive, and the boot process into Windows continues as normal. Ripple configurations contain the same mini registry as floppy boot workstations. The user is prompted for the path to the machine directory unless the path is specified in the setup script. Since most of the Windows files are already located on the server as they were also with the floppy boot, the file copy phase would only copy about 2 megabytes of files. Ripple Image DLL is used to create a boot image file containing all of the needed components for the Ripple booting workstation. Setup calls Ripple Image DLL and creates a file on the server containing a disk image of the boot disk. Ripple Boot Sys contains the updated boot sector which Ripple Image uses when making a disk image. nwrippleterm.com is a program that turns off the Ripple ROM. Ripple Image DLL, Ripple Boot Sys, and nwripplecom are all Microsoft files. The boot image file name and the workstation's network address and node address can be entered into the boot config sys file in the sys logon directory of the network server. Boot config sys is a text file containing one record for each Ripple workstation or group of workstations. Multiple workstations can be specified by using wildcards or question marks within the network address. The syntax for this is documented in the Windows 95 Resource Kit in Chapter 5. Your decision on the type of installation process to pursue should be based on the volume of desktops that you'll be upgrading. To perform a push, hands-free installation requires you to perform some extensive planning, grouping users, and creating different batch INI files, setting up SMS or other third-party tools. This is most efficient when the number of desktops you're upgrading is large. In a corporate environment where you might have hundreds or even thousands of computers, the migration will require more planning. Microsoft's System Management Server can be used to automate the large-scale deployment of Windows 95, making the upgrade process faster, easier, and less expensive for your organization. System Management Server can be used for centralized management of the computers in an enterprise network, including inventory, software distribution and installation, management of shared applications, remote management and troubleshooting, and network protocol analysis. Systems Management Server organizes computers into a hierarchy of sites. A site is a group of servers and client computers typically located in a single geographical area. A site can consist of one or more domains, that is a set of servers and clients that are managed as a group, existing on the same LAN. System Management Server uses the terms central, primary, and secondary to identify the capabilities of the sites in the hierarchy. A central site is a primary site at the top of the hierarchy from which all sites and computers in the hierarchy can be administered. A primary site has its own Microsoft SQL Server database, which contains all of the hardware and software inventory information for the site and its subsites, which sites attached below it. The primary site can run the Systems Management Server Administrator tool for local administration of the site server and all subsites. A primary site must be running Windows NT Server. Microsoft System Management Server is part of Backoffice, which offers a powerful, secure, reliable, and open infrastructure to administer your enterprise. A major focus of System Management Server 1.1 is the support of the Windows 95. Many organizations are concerned about the cost associated with migrating to Windows 95. The senior MIS strategists in many corporations realize this upgrade will require many resources. A Gartner report, published in August of 1994, shows that by performing thorough advanced planning and using powerful tools to help with the migration, this cost can be reduced as much as 70%. Systems Management Server can play a vital role in the migration to Windows 95. Systems Management Server can greatly reduce the time involved with the planning and preparation necessary to migrate to Windows 95. It can perform the actual upgrade automatically without the need to visit each computer. Upon completion of the upgrade, you can use Systems Management Server to produce reports showing the status of the upgrade and continue to use it to centrally manage the new Windows 95 desktops. Systems Management Server can help you locate and inventory workstations to target for the upgrade to Windows 95. The Windows 95 Deployment Guide provides details of the installation process for users migrating to Windows 95. And one of the first steps is to determine which machines are acceptable for the upgrade. There are a number of requirements, such as processor type, memory, available disk space, and specific software configurations that must be considered. Compiling the information about each computer connected to the corporate LAN or WAN can be a costly challenge, especially if your computers are distributed over a wide geographic area. System Management Server performs automatic inventory. You don't have to visit each machine since all of the hardware and software details are gathered automatically from each machine and stored in a central database. You can simply query the database for machines that match your upgrade criteria and then organize them into machine groups that can be targeted for automatic upgrade. If for some reason one or more of these computers cannot be successfully upgraded, you can use System Management Server's remote help desk tools to actually resolve the issues from a central location. You can even reboot the remote computer for the next upgrade attempt. Systems Management Server reduces network traffic by compressing the Windows 95 files into a package. This package is then distributed across the network to a local server at the remote site. Advanced scheduling provides full control of the process. You can control when and how the distribution process takes place and decide which communications protocols and links to use. After distributing the software package, System Management Server can at a predetermined time automatically invoke the Windows 95 upgrade process. Systems Management Server can inform the administrator when the installation has been successfully completed, or should the upgrade fail for some reason, System Management Server will send an error message to the administrator so that the problem can be resolved. Systems Management Server provides proactive support for users. Takes advantage of the inventory database and the ability to automatically install and upgrade software and prevent many of the problems that are associated with these processes. So right now I'm going to go and do a sample query on an SMS 1.1 server. So on the server here I've got the SMS administrator on the desktop. I'm going to go ahead and open up my queries window. And I've already created a sample query here of machines with less than 6 megabytes of RAM. I can double click on it and I can see it's going to look for what machines I need to be replaced possibly before I upgrade them. So I go ahead and run the query. Click OK. It's asked me for a size. I'm going to go ahead and put in 6 megs. And we found there's 47 computers at my multiple sites that have less than 6 megabytes of RAM. And so I might go ahead and upgrade a machine, for instance, in London, with more memory before I send it the Windows 95 upgrade package. Also, with the packages in with SMS Server 1.1, we can upgrade Windows 95 fairly easily. I'll go ahead and click on the package and choose a new package. And I'm going to import a PDF file. Okay, and now I could assign for this package what type of installation I want. If I want to do a manual Windows upgrade, or I want to do a manual setup for a DOS client, and those various features, and I point to the source directory for the Windows 95 installation. And then I could send that package to any of my sites I have listed here. We've got New York and Chicago, Paris. So I could send that package to any of these sites, and I could base it on that query, so any machine with greater than 6 megs of RAM could receive the package. There's also an enormous amount of information available from the SMS clients in the machine database. This information could be used to prepare before visiting a site or identifying configuration issues before they cause problems. So let's look at some of the things you could look at on the remote Windows 95 station. So again, I'm at the SMS administrator screen, and I'm going to go ahead and find my Midway domain. And Strawberry 5 is the computer I've been using, so I'll double click on it. And earlier, I logged into the SMS domain, and it gathered some information about hardware inventory and software inventory. So for instance, I can scroll down and I can look at the hard drive on Strawberry. I can scroll over and I can see that I only have about 154 megabytes of free space left on that drive. So that should be easily plenty for a Windows 95 installation if I wanted to. I can scroll down, I can see how much RAM I have on the machine. I can also check various things like the PC BIOS version. So that type of information could be very useful before you head out to a site. Well, that's it. You've seen it all. I'd like to thank Lex for playing the role of the typical user here. I know it might be hard for him to switch gears from a Windows 95 trainer to a novice user. So, thanks, Lex.
No problem, Mike. Glad to help.
I'd also like to thank Dell Corporation for giving us the computers for these demos. During the Windows 95 system administration session, we discussed all those S words, like SNMP, server-based setup, scripted or batch installs, and SMS integration for making Windows 95 administration easier. We built on the past shows and hope made the system administration features of Windows 95 clear. There are many new aspects to Windows 95 that should make administering Windows clients easier than ever.
Thanks, Lex, for helping Mike out today. Mike, come on over for our last round of questions and answer, but don't get too comfortable because I'm about to send you over in a couple minutes for another demo. Once again, Frank Ramirez is here to help field your questions. We want to thank those of you who have called in. The Windows 95 engineers have been extremely busy and have sent us many, many questions. But before we get to your questions, you got it. One more time, here's the contest question. Okay, guys, name the feature of Microsoft Windows 95 that allows you to set access parameters for all users on your network. As I said earlier, 100 names will be drawn from the correct answers to receive a copy of Microsoft Encarta. Everyone that calls will have their name entered into the grand prize drawing for a chance to win a new multimedia computer system provided by the Dell Computer Corporation. Call 1-800-254-4069 to answer the question for your chance to win. Be sure to leave us your name and phone number when you answer the question. Now, let's get to the last round of questions. And by the way, thanks a lot. I mean, you've done a yeoman's job today, and we really have covered a lot of technical material. I know a couple times I've been asking Frank, what does that mean, and the like. But once again, anything you don't understand, go to the Bible, the resource kit. Yeah. Well, you know, we got a call from Audrey in Chicago, and she asked me to direct it to you, Frank, which is wanted to know, if you really look at central management, what's the key benefit of central management?
Well, I think the key benefit is really a cost savings. I mean, no longer will you have to send someone out to count the machines or to configure the machines or to diagnose problems with the machines. You can do a lot of this stuff using SMS. And so the advantage here is that, I mean, simple cost savings of being able to do that remotely. You can even prepare, for example, let's say you do find a problem with a machine or a group of machines, you can actually prepare using the diagnostic tools so that when you go on site, you'll be prepared to take care of the issue at hand. So that's the big benefit, just cost savings.
I guess just leveraging from my own perspective, the Masie Center, we found that very often, if you look at the cost of support, the diagnostic is the biggest cost.
Yes.
In other words, figuring out what's wrong, and increasingly as people work in complex environments, and they're in GUI environments, and they're in the kind of environments that our users will be using, being able to remotely look in and see what's really going on and try to facilitate that diagnostic process, I think is going to be really critical. And I think you're going to score lots of points with the support professional community by being able to, in a sense, reach out and touch somebody's desktop and see what's going on. Well, you look too relaxed, Mike. Okay. So why don't you wander back to the Traincast workstation? I'll read you your assignment on the way there. Mike, can an SMS 1.1 system remotely control a Windows 95 machine? Take it away.
Okay. Well, yes, we can do that. First of all, I need to change policies on Lex's machine, because right now it's only set up to run Notepad, and that's not going to help us with the SMS. So I'll go to Lex and his policy here, and System and Restrictions, and I'm going to turn that off so there's no longer a restriction on running applications. Click OK there. I'm also going to change the desktop wallpaper just so it's easier to see here. Change it to circles. Alrighty. And we'll save that. And now on this machine over here, I'm going to log out. And log back in to get the new policy, and we've got circles there. Now on the NT machine, Lex's machine earlier, I had him log into the SMS domain, so now it's processed. And I'm going to click on Lexington. And we'll scroll through, like we did before. We have various things that are in the database, like video and such. And there's an option under Help Desk for remote control. So I'm going to click on that. And now I'm on the NT machine, and I can actually see the Windows 95 desktop. I'm going to go ahead and close the welcome screen. Scroll down a little bit, and I can go to Start and Control Panel, and I actually can look at his network setting and make sure that I'm on his machine. And yes, we're on the Lexington machine. So remotely, I can actually do things on Lex's computer.
So are you actually, come on back over, Mike. So you're actually monitoring or mirroring that. Now, if he does something differently on that machine while you're on that session, will it mirror?
Right. We both have control of the mouse at the same time, so I can actually watch him do maybe the steps he's describing right there and see, oh, you did that wrong, and I can correct it for him.
That's an incredibly powerful tool from a help desk and support professional. I'm going to skip to some of our last questions. We only have a couple of minutes left. First of all, let's talk about the last show. And the last show of this Traincast series is coming in August. What are some of the things that our viewers are going to see on that show?
Well, we have planned for you in the August show, that'll be August 8th live, is that we'll actually go over a lot of the support issues that have been raised through the beta process, the very extensive beta process that we've had with Windows 95. And we'll take you step by step through a lot of the support options that will be available to you, everything from the internet support through online services to the telephone line. We'll talk to you about all those. We'll have some senior management representative come in and talk to you about the state of the product and expectations and sort of set your expectations about Windows 95. And then finally, we'll actually take you through a how to migrate to Windows 95 for all you IS managers there who haven't already started that process. We're going to take you through sort of a high-level overview of the steps that are necessary to make your migration go smooth and easy.
And I would really urge our viewers that we've seen the product evolve throughout the beta, and there's been an enormous number of both bug fixes, but also enhancements and changes that have been a part of getting good product ready to ship. And I think it'll be important for them to check in to see what's been learned and what's really ready to go at that point. One last real quick question over to you. Is on my RPL setup, I don't see the items you mentioned in the autoexec.bat.
No. Yeah, Frank and I are neck and neck on the mistakes right now. Yeah, I made a mistake there on the slides. Right, they aren't in there. There's two items in the AutoExec bat. One is the a com spec, and another one is a copy command. The actual items on a RIPL setup are in a win.bat file that gets created by setup. So yeah, that's correct. A little boo-boo.
Now, you know, one of the things that we've noticed, and you know, you often see these folks from Microsoft, and they look like product managers, or they look like techies, but one of the things I've enjoyed during the Traincast series is hanging out with them and finding that there really is a personality here beyond all their hard work on product. And earlier on, I turned to Mike and I said, Mike, you know, how do you keep track of all the time you're spending on this product? And so he showed me one of his ways of doing it is, and so time flies. Well, as I said, that time has flown here. I want to thank both of you, Frank and Mike, for your help today and really helping people understand some of the ways in which we can do systems management using Windows 95. That's all the time that we have for questions today. Our question and answer line is now closing. And I want to thank our colleagues here for demonstrating systems management within Windows 95 and answering your questions. Today we've learned how Windows 95 systems have been designed for ease of management, both locally and remotely. We are winding down our Traincast series as we near the launch of Windows 95. All of you who've been tuning in have made a commitment to be informed of all of the latest developments in Windows 95. As a trainer, I salute you, and I can assure you that making the shift to Windows 95 will be a much easier process for you as a result of your watching this show. You will serve your organization well with your early knowledge of Windows 95. Be sure and tune in to our final program in the Windows 95 Traincast series. We will focus on support issues that arose during preview and help you ramp up your internal support of the product. And remember, it is your chance to win the Dell Multimedia System. In order to win, you must be watching our live broadcast on August 8th, or else my wife gets the system. So I believe you will also be happy to know that we will be continuing Windows 95 programming in our next season. We love to hear your feedback about the Traincast series. Please send your comments to mstv@microsoft.com. You can also call 1-800-597-3200 for further information. I'm also interested in your feedback as well, and you can reach me at 1-800-95-MASIE. Thanks again for joining us. We're happy to be your source for up-to-the-minute information about Windows 95. We'll see you on our next program. For now, good day from the Microsoft Studios in Redmond, Washington.
If you'd like to subscribe to Microsoft's WinNews electronic newsletter, send Internet email to enews@microsoft.nwnet.com with the words "Subscribe WinNews" as the only text in the body of your message. WinNews file sections can also be found on most major online services. There are a number of electronic distribution points that contain information directly from Microsoft about Windows 95. Use the following electronic addresses for new white papers, press releases, and other documentation. The transcript, content outline, and PowerPoint slides of this broadcast will be available on CompuServe and the World Wide Web at these addresses. To receive the Microsoft project template for deployment of Windows 95, send your name, company name, address, phone, and fax numbers via the internet to deploy95@microsoft.com. The Microsoft project template is also available on CompuServe, Go, MSTV Forum, Windows 95 Library. The title is Win95p.zip. To receive a beta version of the Windows 95 Resource Kit, or for more information about this kit, call 1-800-315-0676. Inside Windows 95 by Adrian King is available for $24.95 at most major bookstores or by calling 1-800-MS-PRESS. To get a program guide for Microsoft TV with information on business-to-business television programs from Microsoft, email us at mstv@microsoft.com. or call 1-800-597-3200. Order Microsoft TechNet by July 17th and receive the August Windows 95 Special Edition. The August issue will contain over 2,600 pages of technical information for Windows 95, including the Windows 95 Resource Kit, Windows 95 support for Novell, Windows 95 training materials, Windows 95 remote administration features, Microsoft TechEd 95 conference materials, Windows 95 troubleshooting setup guide, and more. Call your authorized reseller or 800-344-2121, Department 3121. You can also view a subset of TechNet on the World Wide Web at this address. To order a videotape of today's program, or any in the Windows 95 Traincast series, call 1-800-597-3200. The Windows 95 Traincast series on videotape is a handy reference resource for your migration, implementation, and operation of Microsoft's Windows 95 operating system. Once again, to order any or all of the videotapes in the Windows 95 Traincast series, call toll-free 1-800-597-3200.